across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. You're 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Welcome back to the home of common sense. Thank you to Alex Phillips. She returns tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Coming up today, Ukraine's President Zelensky has accused Donald Trump of being trapped in a disinformation bubble after Trump claimed Ukraine started the war with Russia and could have ended rather easily. I think there's a little bit of revisionism going on there from the American president. Maybe he just misspoke. Also this afternoon, a new police review reveals it's easier for kids to buy knives than paracetamol, prompting stricter knife sale regulations and tougher prison sentences for the under 18s. How many more times, pray to God, are we going to be here in this same rather bizarre debate, which always begins at the wrong end of the telescope? And the number of people on universal credit with no obligation to work has more than doubled in 3 years. We're looking at 3.1 million people in that position. These are extraordinary numbers. We'll look at your responses on all of these stories. 0344 499 1000. You can also drop us a voice note on that number if you want to bypass the queues, or a message 87222. What is the root cause of knife crime? Can I just put the question like that? I think over the years, and I'm thinking of at least 20 years. I know if you're watching this visually, you're thinking, who is this young buck who could possibly recall 20 years ago? Oh, yes, I can, and a little bit more as well. 20 years ago, we were debating this, trying to work, what's the read? That knives are too easy to get hold of. Is it that? What's going on? Is it absent fathers? Is it gang mentality? Yvette, now this is brilliant. This tells you everything you need to know about politicians, and I'm not going to simply point the finger at Yvette Cooper here. She happens to be the current Home Secretary for now. She is merely reflecting the same kind of words that every Home Secretary has said. Yvette Cooper has expressed her shock at the ease with which kids can purchase knives online compared to cigarettes and scratch cards. The Home Secretary is set to unveil a series of measures aimed at saving lives following a damning report that exposed alarming loopholes in current legislation. Now, we know, of course, about the two-tier verification system that Ms. Cooper wants to implement for the Amazon boys and girls. Online retailers selling lives will be made to carry out more vigorous age checks. In response to concerns, there are more rules for buying paracetamol than there are for buying deadly blades. A review of online knife sales has exposed a lack of minimum standards for age and for delivery checks as well. And to close these lethal loopholes and better protect young people from violence, a two-step verification system will be made mandatory for anyone who still sells knives. On and on it goes. This has nothing to do with loopholes. Kids don't carry knives because of loopholes and a lack of ID checks. They carry knives because they want to, and they can be found almost anywhere. Your kitchen at home being the obvious place. Can't get one there. What about your neighbour's kitchen or your nan's kitchen, nicked off a shelf, stolen from a cafe, out of a there's a million places you can get a knife. We don't have a knife crime problem because they're easy to purchase, for God's sake. This is our Home Secretary talking about that. I mean, the list goes on. This is the issue. It's a ludicrous analysis to suggest that the reason we're in this position is because of the ease with which you can buy a blade. I mean, this is... I'm incredulous at how stupid this analysis is. It's only because you can get one easy from the shop or online. This is nonsense. So what is the root cause of knife crime? I mean, you can look at the obvious: feckless, hopeless, rudderless kids. There's some generosity in those terms. Mostly kids, not exclusively, but mostly kids. And when I say kids, I'm talking about teenagers who are responsible for most of the knife crime, OK? The perpetrators, the victims, are usually in that kind of age group, 12 to 20. It's grim to even consider that this cohort is so disproportionately affected by this, mostly young boys. And, of course, we can look at all the commonality in their backstories. You will discover that home life for the perpetrators never looks particularly rosy or good. Kids and education doesn't really exist in some of the lives of these people. Yes, there's the fatherless aspect. I think that's one part of the pie. There's a whole range of issues around this, but you will nearly always be able to point to the background of the person carrying the knife. There will always be a commonality there, not because you can easily buy one online. You don't suddenly go, oh, look, I can buy a knife online. I know what I'll do. I'll become a gang murderer. That doesn't work like that. Why is the Home Secretary even going there in this debate, suggesting that this is all about the ease? I'm really surprised it's harder to buy it. Look, I don't think for one second that most of the kids that are carrying knives, and you've got some machete-wielding dodgepots out there as well who seem to do this with a certain level of impunity, and even if they are caught, nothing really happened, nothing very much seems to happen. But some of those will be purchased online, some will be fake ID if needed at all. Others, they would have just nicked it out of a fishing, a hunting shop, or a DIY place. You can just get one anywhere, mate. 0344 499 1000. If you had to analyse this, let's give the Home Secretary some advice here. What is the root cause of knife crime? What's the starting point to begin the analysis? There was a child whose life was lost to knife crime quite recently, whose mother said she lost control of her kid. I think she said from the age of 6. It was an incredibly distressing story. It was awful. She said she partly blames herself. I don't want to get into pointing fingers here, but she illustrated that he was kind of taken under the wing of undesirables in his neck of the wood, older kids, from a very young age. I've got a 6-year-old. I can tell you now, he ain't going to be taken under the wing of any gang. Can hardly get out the back door to play in the garden without parental permission. It ain't going to happen, and it wouldn't happen to most children. But a small percentage, it will. That kid did not get involved in the knife world because of a lack of verification checks online, or because it was easy to purchase one over at home base. I mean, this is nonsense. This is absolute nonsense. There's something else going on here. What is the root cause of knife crime? 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Simon Danczuk, former Labour MP and reform defector. Is that the right word now, Simon? Defector. Sounds like you've done something wrong when you say defector, doesn't it?
Well, it works, and I'm pleased to have moved, I have to say, after seeing what a shambles this current government's in.
It's a bit grim, isn't it?
It is grim, actually, and I don't think Yvette Cooper's cutting the mustard as far as being Home Secretary is concerned either, and this is just one illustration of it. I think you're right. This isn't about online sales. I mean, by all means, tighten things up a little bit and increase the sentences for people that are supplying the knives. But as you quite rightly point out, people will get a weapon, a knife from wherever they want to get one from. That's not the issue or problem here. I mean, just in terms of online sales, you can tighten it up as much as you want, and then you've got, some illegal immigrant who's doing the delivery service for the online purchase. They're not verifying whether it's an adult or a young person that's signing for the weapon when it's collected at the front door. So that just illustrates some of the problems that we've got here. There's two major issues, really, very much about culture. So I do believe we've imported a machete culture from sub-Saharan Africa, where using a machete, using knives is very common. And I speak with some experience there. I've worked in that area. I'm married to a woman from Africa, and you see the use of machetes very commonly in those cultures, and we've imported a lot of that through immigration and through illegal immigration, and so that's played out on the streets of Britain, I'm very sorry to say. And then the other is very much around the culture within communities, and so I'm referring to discipline, respect for adults, respect for schooling and education, and that's really broken down in some communities. This idea, and it's all about the woke agenda. It's about, we have to accept that anything goes, everything is acceptable. Well, it isn't, and that's broken down over time, and that's created the problems we've got now.
Indeed. Well, let's have a listen to the Home Secretary. This is Yvette Cooper speaking last September. She's got a very ambitious plan to try and address this very issue, Simon. I don't know whether she's going to achieve this, but here she is speaking on knife crime at the tail end of last year.
We will make it a mission for our whole country to halve knife crime in a decade, and yes, this Labour government will pass Ronan's Law, a ban on ninja swords.
Well, we will be speaking to somebody heavily involved in that law shortly. But, I mean, there it is. She's going to halve it in a decade, Simon. If her understanding of the knife crime problem is based on the fact that they're really easy to buy, we haven't got a hope of even reducing it by 10%.
No, that's right. I mean, it's good to have targets and ambitions, but there's a lot of political rhetoric in that speech, isn't there? And, you know, a Home Secretary that just got on with it, and a government that really wanted to turn the culture around, address the issue of immigration, as I've pointed out, really starting instilling respect into young people, getting parents to do the parenting instead of getting the state to do the parenting. We need a government that's really looking to change the culture that we've got in societies. And perhaps that's one of the reasons I've gone from Labour to Reform, which is where we started.
Yeah. But the idea that this is all about loopholes, which is why we've got a knife crime problem, is, I mean, it's almost like saying that if we stop the sale of glass cutters, we'd stop people burgling houses. I mean, it's a ludicrous analysis. We'll see how that pans out. And we have got a couple of guests coming up in this hour as well who are going to hopefully shine some light on to this. Let's move, Simon, to some international news. Donald Trump took aim at Ukraine President Zelensky, criticising for not being criticised. Donald Trump took aim at Ukraine after President Zelensky criticised Trump for not being invited to talks in Saudi Arabia about ending the war. Let's have a listen. And this is really interesting as what Trump had to say on the matter.
And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad.
Well, he's absolutely right about the last point there, Simon. President Biden was so bad. But Donald Trump here has sort of slightly divided the room. I mean, I'm pretty sure he misspoke at that first sentence when he said they shouldn't have started it. I don't think did he specifically mean that?
No, I suspect he didn't. I think he was talking about the fact that the war should just not have escalated in the way that it has done. And I do think we've put Zelensky on a pedestal for the last couple of years, and I think that's been quite foolish on our parts. I mean, the bigger picture here is that Trump is very conciliatory. You know, the last time he was president, I don't think he committed any military to action from the US. He wants a very peaceful world, and I think we should celebrate that. But in terms of Britain and Europe, we've outsourced our defence to the USA for decades, and we've chosen to spend our money on the welfare, on a bloated welfare state, on immigrants coming into our country, and not spent the money on defence. And we've let the USA do that defence on our behalf. And Trump has called that out. And you can't blame him for doing that. And look at us now. You know, you've got Starmer going all over Europe trying to pull a team together at the very last minute. It's embarrassing.
If Reform were to form a government, and of course, if you look at the projections and some of the opinion polls, that's completely doable. I mean, it may sound ambitious from a starting position of 5 MPs, but we're living in very changing times, Simon, and appetites are changing almost by the day, it seems. Do you think Reform would be far more aware of the defence shortcomings that we have at the moment? They would up the spending in this area?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it that Reform have to develop their policies in a lot more detail before the next general election. But I'm in no doubt that a Reform government would be looking to dramatically improve the defence of the United Kingdom, something that we should have been doing over very many decades. There's no doubt about that.
Let's move to this story as well. In fact, I'll tell you what, stay there, Simon. Don't go away. We're going to take a very brief pause. We'll come back. We'll talk about the BBC. We'll talk about the millions of people claiming sick, never need to look for work as well. There's a big old list of stuff to get through. Simon Danczuk is with us, former Labour MP, now a member of the Reform Party. That question we threw out at the beginning, what is the root cause of knife crime? We are going to be speaking in this section to Courtney Barrett, founder of Binning Knives Saves Lives, and also Nikita Kanda, who's the sister of Ronan, the Ronan's Law story, which you heard the Home Secretary refer to in that clip there. This follows Ronan's death after a knife attack in 2021. So we'll get some more voices on that as well. 0344 499 1000. Drop us a voice note on that number too. You can message 87222. It's 18 minutes after 1. This is Talk.
Which is supposed to be a democracy, and that means Parliament comes first, doesn't it? I mean, that's the point that both leaders of the main parties were making, which is that actually, if the law is interpreted in a way which is counter to what was intended, and in this case, clearly Gazans using a Ukrainian scheme is, then politicians that we elect have the right to say so. That's all that was about. And I think, you know, most people would side with the politicians against the judges on that one.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It's 20 past 1. This is Talk. Lots to get through here. This one comes in from Paul in Fife, who says knife crime is zero to do with access to online knives and everything to do with the lack of proactive policing in this country. Our police no longer stop and search. We're not allowed to target the demographic who is mostly likely to carry out the use of knives, namely young black men. It's deemed racial stereotyping. It's nothing to do with racism. It's what police should be doing. You target the demographic. This applies to all types of crime. And I would extend that point, actually, that Paul makes to young black victims, young black male victims. If this was, I've said this a few times, if there was a stat of how many young girls of any colour were dying on a weekly basis in this country, you would have the likes of Jess Phillips and Stella Creasy, quite rightly, highlighting that in Parliament and saying, you know, this is unacceptable. Young girls dying on such a regular basis. It's pointless, it's needless, we need action. For some reason, young boys, young black boys, doesn't seem to, even Sadiq Khan, who claims to be the champion of diversity, can't really bring him, ask him to talk about a ULEZ camera, he'll talk about it for about 3 days. Get him to talk about the death of another kid in his own city, of which he is in charge of the police. He will say very little, almost nothing. We'll take your calls and comments on that. What is the root cause of knife crime? 0344 499 1000. Simon Danczuk is with us. Interesting one here, Simon. 2 million people have been claiming sickness benefit for at least 5 years with no work requirements. You mentioned welfare spending in the last section. I mean, this is crazy. You've got 3 million people claiming universal credit with no obligation to seek work, up from 700,000 in 2020. I mean, we are heading towards an iceberg of a welfare problem in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's got dramatically worse since the pandemic. So I think it was 700,000 people in 2020, January 2020, claiming universal credit who were well enough to work. And that's gone up to 3.1 million over about 3 or 4 years. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And that's been a real failure of government to get on top of this. It's not that long ago. We used to challenge people who weren't in work, who were of working age. They might have had a health condition of some kind. But many of those people can still do certain kinds of work. But now nobody's being challenged to get back into work. And it's become a lifestyle culture that people just buy into. And I suspect that they top up their benefits by working in what we might call the informal economy. I mean, the taxpayer can't just keep spending on this. It's incredibly bad.
And I don't, for 1 second, pretend it's an easy thing to try and sort out. And, when you start getting into people's health issues and the mental health thing, which has, really kind of usurped everything else in this respect. And there is not unreasonably some suspicion as to what constitutes mental health. If somebody has a mental health problem, I'd be the first in line to say we need to help that person. What bothers me is that we've got some of those people who will claim a mental health issue, and in fact somebody called it the new bad back of excuses, and I think there's genuinely something in that.
Oh, I think that's exactly the part of the problem. I think we need to get GPs who are often signing people off to be more challenging in their approach. We pay them to do this work on behalf of the state, and they should do a good job in that. There's been far too many civil servants working from home, so many civil servants through the Department for Work and Pensions aren't actually meeting the claimants anymore, which is a real issue. So that needs to change. There has to be a culture change within the civil service and within the state that's operating this system, so that those that are swinging the lead, as we used to say, are challenged much more than they are doing. We can't afford to carry on spending the amount of money. And I have to say, I think the minister responsible, Liz Kendall, who's going to make 1 or 2 announcements in the next month or so, I think she will really challenge this, just because the money doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, there is the problem. The money doesn't exist. Where do we go from there? There is money at the BBC, though, and they've been accused of using the son of a Hamas government minister to narrate its documentary, which was purporting to showcase ordinary people of Palestine. Let's have a listen to this short section. Here's the problem, Simon. That is young Abdullah, who's clearly very good in front of the camera. He speaks very well. Sounds like, very educated young man for someone who's been living in a war zone. Well, turns out there's good reason for that. That's because he's essentially the sort of Gazan equivalent of Prince Harry. This is a guy who's the son of one of the most senior Hamas government ministers, who was selected by the BBC to narrate and front a documentary. I'm not sure that's the authentic face of what is happening out there. The BBC say we ain't done anything wrong here. They defended it, saying that stating it had editorial control and no input from the children's parents. It's a bit of an iffy look, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think the BBC have got this badly wrong. This is the son of a Hamas government minister that they've used. And this isn't in a short news clip. This was in a lengthy documentary. And the BBC camera people were following this young guy, 14-year-old, around Gaza for several months with an older person who claimed to have been his father. Turns out he was his uncle. I mean, why the BBC would think that was acceptable I do not know. The standards within the BBC in terms of broadcast have slipped considerably, and it's been really shown up during this Israel-Gaza conflict, and this is a perfect example of it.
A perfect example indeed. And what about this as a perfect example of the changing world we live in terms of who gets cast in which roles? This is the story of Cynthia Erivo. She, of course, has been nominated for an Oscar for her role as the green-skinned witch Elfa in the film adaptation of the musical Wicked. Let's have a little listen, if we can, to Cynthia in action. She's a super talented young lady. She's from Stockwell in the UK. I've followed her career before anybody had ever heard of her. Saw her in The Colour Purple, just around the corner at a theatre from here a few years ago. Incredible talent. But she's now been selected, she's British-Nigerian, now been selected to play the role of Jesus in an up-and-coming stage production of Jesus Christ Superstar. Now, I know what everybody's thinking out here. Hang on a second. Well, you know, was Jesus white? Was he black? Some people have always claimed that he was probably what we would call, in today's sense, maybe a mixed race. But regardless of that, and that bit I don't think is the issue. Jesus was a bloke, right? I mean, that, I think, is the problem.
Well, there'd certainly be complaints if I got the role of the witch in Wicked, wouldn't there? For various reasons, probably. But you've got to laugh at this. It's ironic that this is being staged. The role she's playing Jesus in is in Los Angeles, the war capital of the United States. I actually take a very relaxed view about this. You know, this is art. Leave it to the audience to decide whether they want to pay money to see a woman, a black woman, playing Jesus. That's up to them. But on a slightly serious point, it is interesting that those on the left would be very defensive of Islam. We have to be very careful and cautious about how we address their issues. But when it comes to Christianity, anything goes. You know, that's the irony of all this. I'm happy to be relaxed about this sort of matter, but that should apply as much to the Muslim faith as it does to the Christian faith. And I think that's where these issues get a bit more complex.
Indeed. We live in changing times. David Ball, who's one of the presenters here at Talk, as you will know, Simon, has just got the role of playing Nelson Mandela on a national tour. So, you know, it can happen to anybody, clearly. Listen, Simon, thank you. Simon Danczuk with us here on the programme. Always good to engage Simon's views along the way. Anything you heard there you want to drop in a comment on? Is it blasphemous for a woman to play... I don't know if it's blasphemous. It's just a bit silly, isn't it? I mean, I know art does this kind of stuff, all right? I don't really care whether Doctor Who is male, female, black or white. I'm not sure that's even a point of discussion. Jesus, I think it needs to be a geezer, really, in the, you know, in the role. A geezer in Gaza, we could call, I don't know, the musical. Who knows? Whatever you want to call. I think it's a bloke. And I can understand why some Christians would say, you know, that's not really on. But I tell you what, she'll be darn good belting out some of those numbers, that's for sure. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Back to the serious question we raised at the beginning. What is the root cause of knife crime? That sounds like quite a throwaway, obvious question, but bearing in mind we're sort of out of ideas now. The Home Secretary is out of ideas. The Home Secretary is more concerned it's easier to buy a paracetamol or a scratch card than it is... it's easier to buy a knife than it is a paracetamol or a scratch card. It's like, well, it's not about how easy it is. That's not the knife crime problem. No more than, you know, selling glass cutters is responsible for house breakings. I mean, it's a ludicrous analysis. It's what's the root cause of it that is the question we need to ask. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On your smart speaker. On your smart TV. And on your side. This is Talk.
What is the root cause of knife crime? There are clearly some disturbing issues around this. The statistics speak for themselves. And we are so invariably talking about young people here. Almost in the context of this story, almost exclusively young boys who are perpetrator and invariably victim as well. And I genuinely think, I'm staggered by some of the silent voices on this. I mentioned Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, who I think is a fairly vacuous character in this, bearing in mind a lot of this criminality, a lot of these deaths and murders and attacks happen on his watch. I want to hear the Mayor talking about that more than he talks about ULEZ cameras, to be honest. And I think if you Googled Sadiq Khan's speeches over the last couple of years, you would find that the ULEZ cameras win overwhelmingly against this most serious and devastating of subjects. A new police review is to reveal it's easier for children to buy knives than paracetamol, prompting tougher knife crime restrictions. Retailers must report bulk or suspicious sales, and prison sentences for selling blades to under 18s will increase. The rules, known as Ronan's Law, are named after 16-year-old knife crime victim Nikita Kanda. Let's speak to Ronan's sister, who's a campaigner in this area, Nikita Kanda. Nikita, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
A campaign, of course, you would have given out anything not to be fronting. That goes without saying. I'm so sorry for your loss and what happened to your brother. It has meant that you've mobilised your energy into trying to tackle this. My instant analysis, Nikita, of what we're talking about here is that politicians often miss what's really going on here. And I don't sense that the ease with which you buy a knife is necessarily, I mean, that's clearly something we want to make it harder. But if someone is hell-bent on using a knife, they will, right?
I mean, yes, of course. Unfortunately, that is the case. You know, when it's kind of gone past the preventative measures, when it's kind of gone past the point of deterrence working, you know, it will be used. However, we are trying to do everything we possibly can to make it harder, to put in more barriers for the future, and to not allow weapons that are clearly just being designed to seriously harm and murder people to be allowed to be sold freely. And for those who are creating these weapons and for those who are profiting off them and advertising them, they need to be held to account.
I 100% agree with that. Nobody should be able to just buy a machete online, I mean, or anywhere for that matter. It's extraordinary that you can just do that. I think we would all agree with that. But I guess the wider question when it comes to the root causes of this are that those responsible, the perpetrators of your brother's death, would be the kind of people that would find a way to get those weapons regardless, right?
Yeah, I mean, of course, like you said, it just kind of gets to a point where deterrence just won't work, and that's where we kind of really need to intervene. We need to go in now when they're young. We need to make sure that we're doing enough. You know, the schools are doing enough. There's just so many organisations which I believe failed in my brother's case and couldn't get to the murderers before it got too late. And that's probably the case of so many that we're seeing.
So you're saying there were red flags that could have highlighted that there were some dangerous kids out there that could go on to do something lethal, and they did. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, my brother, you know, as you would know, he was mistaken identity. He wasn't intended target of the attack. However, you know, 6 weeks before Ronan was murdered, the murderer went after his intended target, and you know, police were aware. Nothing was kind of done to ensure that murderer doesn't go on to do what he did.
I mean, that is extraordinary, right? I mean, that makes already a life-changing and devastating moment for you and your family. If it is possible to be worse, if that's the right word, it probably isn't, but I think you take the point. The fact that something could have been prevented is just almost the final dishonour and the final injustice here.
Yeah, it really is. And, you know, the sheer size of the weapon that was used on my brother, it keeps me up at night knowing that that weapon went through his heart. And, to this day, it really, really just shocks me that that was just so available and nobody questioned him.
Did we find out in the subsequent court case how this person got hold of such a weapon?
Yeah, so he used his mum's ID. He was ordering them in a period of 6 months, so he was actually harbouring loads of weapons into his home. Wow. And he was a self-admitted arms dealer. And on the day, he went to his local post office, didn't get ID, didn't get any checks, collected the weapon, went on later that day and took my brother's life. Wow. So yeah, he stopped at any point.
Your brother died after his killer picked up a package from a post office. I mean, that sentence is haunting in itself. In terms of the sentence that was given to his killers, tell us a little more about that, if you could.
Yeah, so obviously with them, when anybody gets convicted of murder, they get a life sentence. However, it's always with a minimum term to serve. So one got 18 years minimum and the other got 16 years minimum. Of course, that's never going to be enough, is it, for us? I mean, we're suffering for the rest of our lives. I mean, we do this campaigning and we do all of this work, but if I'm being honest, it's so painful every single day, knowing what Ronan went through, knowing what our lives have turned into. So yeah.
Well, listen, it's admirable that you've been able to transpose that energy and your time into something like this. Clearly that's a positive, but as I said at the beginning, Nikita, something you really wish you weren't having to do. But I thank you for coming on with us. Nikita Kanda, who's the sister of Ronan, has found herself as the campaigner in this area. That's just a position. I mean, I'm a campaigner because somebody in my family was stabbed to death, and that's where she's found herself. As she said there, you will never get over it, and she gave us a brief précis of some of the circumstances of her brother's death. It is beyond believable that you could firstly pick a package up like that from a post office without ID checks. The idea that this is not a greater taboo, whether it's the police, whether it's people have mentioned education as well in some of the communications we've had. There is a problem, and that problem I don't sense ultimately is down to just how easy it is to buy one. Let's speak with Courtney Barrett, founder of Binning Knives Saves Lives. Afternoon to you, Courtney. You will have already been familiar with Nikita's story, and sadly, because of the work you do, you will have spoken to lots of people who can tell that same grim and tragic tale.
You know what I'm really sick of? People like Nikita, who have been found by the government, who have gone through hell, and then they're the ones who are doing the government's job. You know, I work with around about 20 families who have had family members murdered due to knife crime.
Yep.
And all of these families, they're out there every day doing different things to reduce knife crime and to spread awareness in communities and to educate youths, all the things that our government should be doing. It's the knife crime. About 5 years ago, I've done a documentary, and I said, if we don't do something about the knife crime now, in a few years' time, it'll be too late.
Yep.
Just as Nikita just said, it's too late. Yep. Deterrence. Listen, I saw Sadiq Khan a few months ago. I asked him about knife crime, and it was blatantly obvious he didn't have a clue, didn't care. He said to me that there's knife amnesties in the police station, and now you've got the government talking about sales of knives, which isn't going to do anything really and truly. These are token gestures. These are token gestures by people who don't care. Why weren't these things implemented 10 years ago? Where's our stricter laws? It should be 5 years standard. You get caught with a knife on you, 5 years, go to prison straight away.
100%. And I mean, just to completely back up what you're saying here as well, I mean, I found it ridiculous that Yvette Cooper has expressed her shock at the ease with which you can buy knives. I mean, really? You're the Home Secretary. That's new news to the Home Secretary. Man alive. I mean, that's hardly the headline here. As I said at the beginning, kids aren't going out with knives just because of a loophole, because it's easier to buy than a packet of paracetamol. And you're right. You know, when you get caught, when you get stopped, every Home Secretary said, and you would have seen it more so than me, Courtney, they all say the same thing. Labour, Tory, we're going to get strict on knife crime. Nobody ever does. And if you're 16 right now and you're stopped in an inner city street with a knife, the chances are you probably won't even get arrested, let alone charged.
Exactly. It's just a joke out there. Let me tell you about somebody called Joseph Cullimore from Chinkford, 46-year-old man. He was knocked out, and then whilst he was knocked out on the floor, a 16-year-old stabbed him 7 times and murdered him. The 16-year-old, because of his age, only got 6 years. He was out in 3 years, and then he stabbed someone else and straight back in prison again. You know, this is what's going on. Our government and our mayor, our London mayor and the authorities, they haven't got a clue to the severity of knife crime.
Yep.
They have not got a clue what to do. Let me throw a few facts out. We all talk about youths and gangs and stuff. We talk about zombie knives. Well, most knife crime is committed using kitchen knives. 70% of knife crime is kitchen knives are used, yeah?
Yep.
And most knife crime is committed by over 18-year-olds. So it's not just the youths and gangs, it's everybody. You've got more people carrying knives because they're scared now. I know so many men around about my age in their 50s who carry knives because they've got no confidence in the police. They need to protect themselves. That's what they're thinking in their minds. So many people are carrying knives now. You've got 8-year-old kids going to school. I remember in 2019 reporting that there were over 15,000 kids in school had been caught with a knife in 2019. So why has nothing been done? Why are kids still being getting stabbed at school?
Yeah.
Why has nothing get done? Why are there no bleed control kits in schools and in pubs around the country? Because that's what we do as a charity, as a community, as human beings who care about others.
Sure.
You know, so we do what we can to reduce knife crime. We've got 11 strategies to reduce knife crime, not just one. Not just one like the government's got or like Sadiq's Khan's got that doesn't do anything.
Yep.
We've got proven strategies that were proven to reduce knife crime. And these guys have ignored us for years because we embarrassed them and got the figures that they were trying to achieve.
So we need better politicians. We need different kind of policing. We certainly need courts to implement more rigorous and obvious sentences. But what about the root cause? And when we're talking about the point of young kids in cities dying, perpetrators and victims, you know, in these kind of ages, as Nikita's brother, he was 16. What's happened to the perpetrator? What is there a common backstory to these kids? What's going on here, Courtney?
Let me tell you the root cause. First of all, around about the millennium, about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you had a lot of kids, having babies, 15, 16-year-olds. So now we've got to the age where these kids are 15, 16, or around about that age, and the mums and dads, if they're still together, that is, are around about 30 years old. Kids have been raising kids. There's no morals, there's no decency, there's no respect, there's no parenting skills, you know? And on top of that, you've got a government that doesn't care, you've got mayors that don't care, you've got laws that are totally outdated and ridiculous. You know, you've got all this going on, and there's so much knife crime, it's ridiculous. You're scared to say boo to anyone on the street. Now you might get stabbed.
Indeed.
You know, you're safer staying in your house. I think people need to stop voting for red and blue and start voting for people who care about London and care about the UK. You know?
100%. Listen, Courtney, you're speaking common sense. I can hear the exasperation as well in your voice. Courtney Barrett, founder of Binning Knives Saves Lives, who believes certainly government should be listening to him and those that work alongside him, but have ignored a lot of that. There's some real common sense stuff in there. If you're caught with a knife, you go to jail and you go for a long time. That isn't the case at the moment. You could be caught multiple times before anything as severe as jail even kicks in. What is behind it? He talked about kids having kids back in the day, and therefore you've got almost a lawless, rudderless group of young boys that are out there at the moment with no real parental control, no dad around, and a mum that has zero control because she's only about 20 herself. Good Lord. I mean, it's all of that and more. 0344 499 1000. What is the root cause of knife crime? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
Some breaking news this morning revealed that under the Terrorist Act, 242 people were arrested in the year to June of this year.
That's something you can indulge in as to all the people who aren't going to prison because, well, there's no prison spaces.
So this is a Talk exclusive we've been looking at.
I said, you take these cuffs off me and speak to me like a human being rather than a common criminal.
You're just left wondering, does these people who lead us actually hate Britain? Yeah. Do they not love our country and everything that we've stood for?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, just coming up on 10 to 2. Let's go to Simon in Northamptonshire. What have you got for us, Simon? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Long time no speak.
Yeah, how you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Can't complain.
Good.
Just regarding the knife crime issue.
Yeah.
I don't think it's, well, not binary, but I don't think it's one of those things where A immediately leads to B. I think there are a series of factors that do happen that all contribute and need to be addressed. And one, I think, starts within the education system. When the children are younger, they're looking at things like with the cultural shift we've had towards reality TV stars, pop stars. It's shown that if you can become famous and quite likely infamous, you can achieve what you want. They see these people getting to be reality TV stars going on, Britain's Got Talent, and that steers them away from the structured life where I speak for myself as a child that got into a bit of trouble. You do those kind of things. You realise, actually, if I'd have stuck down to some structure, studied, been in a stable home, I would have never got there. So I'm not saying that reality TV stars, they cause people to become criminals that want to stab people, but you start down a path where you've got a culture of instant gratification, impatience, and I think all of these things do tend to lead into, the gang culture. This is very appealing.
Do you know what? I think you're right, because I can hear many people listening to this at the moment, Simon, going, what are you talking about? What? Because, Love Island is on the TV. That's Actually, there probably is. Life is full of very interesting interpretations that aren't always the obvious ones. And I think there is a culture of some young people that see going to work as something that is not for them. And why should they? Because there's other ways of earning a living. There's other ways of, having a great lifestyle. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. That, in the pie chart, would be part of the reason, right? I mean, I think that's true.
Just part of it. So it's not the sole cause. There are, of course, other factors in there, like the family environment. But once you start taking that out, if you've got a single-parent home where instead of mum and dad, it's just mum, she's working loads of hours, she's struggling to bring up her child, and everything she's telling them is, actually, this is quite boring. You're saying, study, look at you, why should I respect you? Oh, this gang, they're teaching me about all these things. They can let me drive underage and do these things that seem much more fun. You just start down that path, and once I think you're 75% of the way down there, very difficult to come back from. And carrying a knife doesn't seem like such a big thing because it's within the sphere of friends that you've got. They all do that. That becomes the norm.
And also, the conversations some of those guys will have with each other about getting caught with a knife, that actually also sounds quite cool as well. Oh, if I go to jail, they've watched all the Netflix show of the anti-hero in prison. Until you get to be in jail when you realise, actually, this is a bit rubbish. But before that, that is romanticised.
Exactly, and I think that's the problem you've got there. It needs to be addressed, first of all, in schools, to not even start them on that path. But then again, it's this cyclic thing, what I was saying about single-parent families. If they're not even making the effort to take the child to school, you're not even going to be able to address that because they don't instill brilliant values in their children. They're not going to school where they could potentially get those values and that structure. And again, I speak as someone as a child that I was a bit of a naughty child because I got bored with what was around me. I wanted to see something that was more fun because as a child, you don't have the ability to comprehend. Actually, there's long-term benefits in doing this and studying, getting an education. All of this path that you're thinking is fun now will have long-term consequences that will mess up your future. But kids obviously are too naive to see that.
Indeed, and that's perhaps inevitable to a degree, but it's certainly tragic. Simon, thank you. Simon in Northamptonshire, making some really good points. And like all of those kind of complex subjects, there's not one reason. There's a load of them. In fact, Courtney, our guest, who advocates and tries to educate and help solve the problem, said they've got an 11-step plan of things that are wrong. I think he's right. There's, without any doubt, the parental component is massive. Schools play a huge part. The criminal justice system is crucial. Buying knives, yes, that should be addressed, but as he said, 70% of knife crimes happen because of a domestic knife, something you got out your parents' kitchen. So loads of different reasons perhaps behind it. Anthony says the only way knife crime will drop is an automatic minimum sentence of 2 years for carrying one without reason, straight to prison on remand. As if you're carrying a knife, you are not safe to be out in public. Prisons are too soft. 2-person cells should be made a 3-person cell. You're in prison to have a hard time. Prisons should be somewhere you're going to dread going. No more 50% tariff. You earn a lower sentence in prison along with privilege. More prisons should be attached to a factory producing goods, which in turn pays for the prison to function. Something in all of that as well. David is in Manchester on this question. What have you got for us, David? Afternoon to you.
Oh, hi, good afternoon, Ian. Yeah, you've had 2 really good guests on the last few minutes. And yes, A, it starts with the schools, education. B, prison. If we reopened the Borso institutions and sent these kids, if you're caught with a knife first time, 1 year.
Yeah.
No time off. Caught second time, 2 years. Third time, 5 years. No TV, no snooker table on recreation or anything like that rubbish. So you're just in a cell, and hopefully they can do some education, like rehab, supposedly, but nobody pays for that anymore.
Yeah.
And yes, the parents that have broken up, that's a big problem. My partner used to work with a lot of these children, and their lives were horrendous, but the parents had no control over the children.
It is that. I was talking to somebody just today who works in a connected area, and she was in court because she was seen as the responsible adult working for the authority to be with this kid who was about 13. They finished the court case. He'd been in trouble, this kid. She was responsible for taking him home, but there was no home to go to. There was no home. He said, there's no food in the home when I get home. So she took him to McDonald's. This is like the social worker.
Yeah. My partner had that where somebody turned up with a gun at work and another one machete.
Wow.
And there was no security there. But where the parents, why they let them go out with things like that? Now, if I went out with a gun, I'd get 5 to 8 years automatically.
100%.
And that's a lethal weapon. So is a machete. So is a knife.
Yeah.
And jail is too soft. It's too soft.
And none of those kids expect to get caught, so they're quite cavalier about it because they don't think they're the ones that are ever going to get caught. But of course, it's about getting before they even want to carry a knife, addressing that.
Well, I'm an ex-commando, and if somebody came in with a knife, then that's a disadvantage because I'd take the knife off them.
Yeah. Well, you know how to do it. You know the manoeuvres. I guess most people don't, sadly. Listen, David, thank you for that great call. David in Manchester. Andrew is in South Wales. What have you got for us, Andrew? Hi.
Hi, Ian. Nice to meet you. And I just wanted to say that one of the most important factors here, and it happens in America with gun crime as well, in terms of violence towards children, violence in young male adults, is the lack of a father figure. When you're growing up as a child, as a boy, going through puberty and having that huge rush of testosterone, the father figure is probably the most important person in your life at that time. He teaches you how to use that aggression positively, channels the aggression, shows you how to protect girls, the family unit. And for some reason, we seem to have eradicated that, it's kind of prehistoric nonsense and, sisters are doing it for themselves. But I'm telling you, we don't place enough emphasis on the emotions and the chemical well-being of teenage boys. And you can look statistically in terms of gun crime in America too. It all stems from these single-parent families without father figures.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because I know there's a few people are contacting us saying, well, hang on, I'm a single parent and, I have a very rigid and reasonably strict upbringing for my kids. I get that, because that's the other way round. It doesn't mean every single parent is going to have a dodgy kid that's going to get into gang culture and start stabbing people. But those that do invariably come from families that are at the very least dysfunctional in some shape or form. Andrew, I have to move on because we hit the clock. Thank you for that. Shell says it's very annoying hearing one-parent families being blamed for how many of these knife crimes have both parents. So many men have no input in a child's life, even when they live with them. Fair point. Happy to acknowledge that too. 0344 499 1000. What is the root cause of knife crime? I think we've reasonably more than established in this hour. There's more than one. Your take on that. Theo Usherwood's going to join us in the next section to look through the big political stories of the day, and there's lots out there. You can get in touch and send us a voice note. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome to the home of common sense. We've got a busy couple of hours on the way. We're talking to the police review, revealing it's easier for kids to buy knives than paracetamol, prompting stricter knife sales regulations and tougher prison sentences for under 18s. Look, we know this already. Is it the real answer to the problem? What is the root cause of knife crime? We'll continue to take your calls, and we've had some incredible guests and calls in the last section. Also this afternoon, a migrant couple whose children crossed the Channel alone are seeking asylum in the UK under the European Convention on Human Rights. That's one way to do it, some might say. We'll have details on that. And inflation rose from 2.5% to 3% in January, the highest in 10 months, driven by airfares, food and private school fees, would you believe? We'll have more on all of those stories throughout the course of this hour. 0344 499 1000. Theo Usherwood is with us, political commentator, an all-round good bloke. How are you?
Lovely to be invited on.
It's
very much always to be a pleasure.
It's a bit of a lottery with us who we select for these prestigious gigs, Theo, as you know, and we have a look at who's out there, but all names always gravitate back to Theo Usherwood. You see.
Interestingly, I was at that briefing that you're talking. The police did a briefing on that on the knife crime stuff.
Yes.
I mean, it is extraordinary. And the commander, whose name's Stephen Clayman, did this briefing, and he was saying basically what criminals are doing is they're going online, they're buying like 300 knives at one time. They then go onto Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and they advertise the knives, selling them for like a tenner a go, depending on what they get. And they're getting kids as young as 12 years old, 11 or 12 years old, buying these knives. So what they do is they advertise them on Snapchat or Instagram. Yeah. Somebody comes along and they say, okay, I want to buy this knife. They then take it off Snapchat and they go to they revert to something like WhatsApp and encrypted end-to-end messaging, and then they do the deal then. I mean, it's just it's an industry, and I think what they want to do, what the government are looking to do, and they're going to bring forward some amendments to the legislation that's about to come to the House of Commons, is they want to turn it into. They want to turn knife sales into a little bit like Deliveroo. So, if you get that's not to belittle it, that's to try and strengthen it, by the way. So if you order a Deliveroo, you get a code, so they can prove you've done. You've got to give them the number, and then you get it, rather than just the courier turning up on a bike and putting the knife on your doorstep, and then it could go to anyone. And there's also some age verification. I think they use. I use it with Zipcar. You have a photograph of yourself, which then links. And
all of that. I mean, which won't be the only answer to the overarching problem, but it will certainly help. And we spoke to Nikita Kanda, who's the sister of Ronan, who, of course, this whole law is based around this. The person that killed her brother picked up the knife from the post office, so he ordered it online, no ID. Young kid picks up from the post office.
Yeah, they're going to, and I think what they want to do is for companies outside the UK, they want an import licensing scheme. They also want to introduce a prohibited persons test, so you can basically, the government can ban people. If you have a criminal record for violent offences, you could be banned from selling knives, in the same way that you can ban individuals from selling guns in this country. You have to have a specific licence, and the price is going to go up, because inevitably there's going to have to be a registration scheme now if if you're a retailer that sells knives.
But of course, it won't stop knife crime. As our previous guest said, 70% of knives used in knife crime and death are taken from the kitchen. So all of everything we've just talked about it's welcome, but won't supply the full answer. Let's look at this story. Kurdish-Turkish migrant couples, kids, crossed the channel alone. I mean, man alive, that in itself is worth.
So the parents were in the boat, weren't they, with this one, and then they got thrown out of the boat, or the mum got thrown out of the boat.
And the parents are now seeking to be reunited under the European Convention of Human Rights.
Yeah, it's the same story. Same story with all of these cases. It's the European Convention on Human Rights. They're using Article 8 in this particular example, which is a right to a family life. It's the same part of the European Convention on Human Rights, which is being used by, which was used by the family from Gaza, who wanted to use the Ukrainian scheme, and they were saying
that's right.
European Convention on Human Rights. Keir Starmer isn't going to take us out of the European Convention on Human Rights. He's got no plans to do that. The government has absolutely no plan to do that whatsoever. The Conservatives had the opportunity to do it. They didn't like the idea of doing it under Rishi Sunak. He wasn't prepared to do it, and there was this whole row about it. And so we're going to continue to get these cases in. There's no way around it. These cases are going to continue to crop up, because every time these cases go before the court, the judge representing these individuals, in this case it's the parents who want to come to this country to be reunited with their children who stayed on the small boat and then crossed the English Channel, just saying European Convention on Human Rights, want to come to the UK now in order to have.
But I mean, the idea of putting your kids through that on their own to begin with.
Well, I think from this case is that they were in the boat.
And then were separated.
Mum then got pulled out of the boat by the other migrants. Dad then got out of the boat to try and save Mum, and then the boat went off.
It went.
Went off. It went. But lawyers really smart. They think, right, whiz over to the other side of the channel. We've got these two children here. Let's go find the parents. Find the parents, and it's
and based on everything we've seen recently, I would imagine it's a dead cert that they'll be reunited.
Because it's British law is precedent, right? So you go, okay, well, what grounds can the judge turn it down on? He's got however many, the lawyers who represent this family could go, oh, well, there's so many other cases where you've applied the European Convention on Human Rights. Keir Starmer doesn't want to take it out. I think there may be, look, if there's any hope that this might change, I think that other European nations are starting to twig to the problem of this. The Germans, we've got the German elections coming up, the right-wing CDU are likely to get in. they're seeing the problems of this convention, European Convention on Human Rights. They're facing the same particular issues. The trick is, herding cats when it comes to, Europe, right? Everybody's got a different opinion about what needs to be done.
Of course.
But can there be sort of a consensus now that you either need to get rid of the European Convention on Human Rights, and of course there'll always be an argument against it because it underpins our human rights law, or actually can, for the life of us, just somebody find like some sort of agreement where the European Convention on Human Rights is just rewritten, it's reformed, so that we don't continually have these cases.
I mean, that to me would be the answer.
But until that happens, these cases will just continue. Your listeners are going to be driven potty by it.
Absolutely, but how hard can it be? Even if you said, OK, right, we're not leaving it, but and I'm sure there'll be a very wise person somewhere with lots of letters after their name who will tell us, these are the reasons why it could affect you. Forget all the sort of chicken nugget gate and Ukraine schemes and all of that. These are actually the real reasons why we're in it. All right, OK, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, but surely we would have to reform some. I don't know why that would be controversial to suggest reforming it, and that stories such as this and usurping or moulding the law to its nth degree to make a case. It's those areas that cause the problem.
If you're being cynical, the only person I could think who wouldn't want, and I'm being really cynical, a bit tongue-in-cheek, right?
Yes.
Okay, so just don't shoot a messenger. But the only person I could think who wouldn't want the European Convention on Human Rights reformed is Nigel Farage, because he's just sitting back with Reform MPs and they're going, come on then, let's just have another case and another case and another case, and it's just ticking up. And people are getting angrier and angrier and angrier because the courts are allowing this to happen, the judges are allowing this to happen, and the politicians are not doing nothing to change it. And the Tories say, oh, well, you need to change the law. Well, you had 14 years to do that.
And you didn't do it. Kemi Badenoch didn't back it either.
Didn't back it either. So it then comes, and the only person who I could possibly think who would think that actually, you know what, guys, you carry on doing you. You do you.
Yeah.
Would be Nigel Farage saying, and he'll sit back and he'll romp home in 4 years' time because, everybody was just so sick and tired of these cases coming up. And because they make his point for him, right?
Let's move to this story. It seems that CV Gate, there's a whole Netflix show in the government minister's CV. You can have a different person each week. Today, the spotlight has stopped on Jonathan Reynolds. He's the business secretary. Apparently said he was a solicitor. Spoiler alert. He's not a solicitor because he didn't qualify as one. I think he did some training, but he didn't qualify.
Well, it's a protected profession. It's like being a doctor. You can't just claim to be a doctor.
Yes.
You want to turn up in a room. Oh, well, I've trained to be, but I didn't actually complete the training. You want to know if you've got to go and see a solicitor that you're paying good money. What's a solicitor charge? What, 200 quid an hour at least?
Something like that.
250 an hour.
Yeah.
You want to go and see a solicitor. You want to know that the person is qualified to give you that legal advice. So. You don't just sort of blabbing about it. Oh yeah, I'll tell Parliament.
He did the training back in 2010. So he did the training.
But he didn't complete the training.
No, he didn't complete, because halfway through the training, or less than that, I understand, he thought, oh, I want to become an MP now. So forget the solicitor thing. But then you can't then claim to be a solicitor.
But I think I'll make a serious point, and then I'll make a slightly frivolous point. The serious point is, why did Jonathan Reynolds say this? In the same vein as why did Rachel Reeves make up that she was an economist? And I go back to the general election. The reason he said it is because he was going, his incoming business secretary, big responsibility, huge brief, negotiating closer working relationship with the European Union, possibly a trade deal with the likes of the United States, right? So that's why he wants to be taken seriously. He doesn't have a hinterland in business. He doesn't have a backstory where he turned one man and his dog business into a huge successful UK conglomerate. No. So he wants to be taken seriously. He's leaning really heavily on the fact that he had some training as a solicitor once upon a time, and then over-egged it to say that he was a solicitor. And this speaks to this narrative that we heard before the election of just Labour saying to the country, saying to voters, trust us, we're serious people, we're grown-ups. We've done grown-up jobs like being an economist, like being a solicitor. That's what they're doing. The frivolous point, and they say this as a political journalist, when I was a young un running around, everybody was checking, all the researchers were checking, who did you retweet, who did you follow on Twitter, it was always social media looking, and then we got into Facebook for a while about, who your friends or what groups are you members of on Facebook, trying to map, do people have sort of some surreptitious, some covert interests that would give the game away online. And now it's all about LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn is the new gold mine.
Which everybody thought, is that still going, the LinkedIn thing?
But
many people swear by it.
Everybody is on LinkedIn now. You've got to be, I haven't got shares in LinkedIn, don't...
But it does work for some people in the employment department.
In the employment industry. And I go on it a little bit, and, people take it really seriously.
Yeah.
Forget Facebook. I mean, my auntie's on Facebook. That's over. It's all about...
Everyone's auntie's on Facebook.
Everybody's on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And that seems to be now, if you've got, if you want to dish the dirt on a particular politician, don't worry about anything else.
Okay, let's go on LinkedIn. Let's try it here, Theo. Give us a high-profile front-bench Labour politician, Secretary of State. David Lammy, should we go?
David Lammy, yes.
David Lammy, let's go. I'm on the LinkedIn page. Just have a look at that. So the results, there it is. David Lammy, before going into Parliament, I was one of the co-inventors of the iPhone. So there you've got it straight away. Yet another rip-roaring tissue of whoppers from a front bencher. Worked alongside Steve Jobs. He couldn't quite cut it, so I finished off the project, he says. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. What about this? Net zero will mean higher bills amidst Miliband. Now, this is extraordinary, namely because they spent they stopped for a bit, but most of the general election campaigning saying... we're going to drop your energy bills, 300 quid. Kept saying 300 quid here. Loads of clips of it. Keir said it, Rachel said it, and of course Ed Miliband couldn't stop saying it. And then suddenly they did all stop saying it when they realised it wasn't possible.
Yes, and they're not saying it anymore, and of course they won't repeat that claim in the dispatch box, because nobody would want to be ever accused of deliberately misleading the House of Commons by saying something they know to be untrue, and that's why they're not saying it. And this is an interesting... The Telegraph have gone back into some advice provided by officials that is actually, I think it's quite old advice, but look, it's true, right? The officials are saying it, they've been saying it for a long time, and I think that's the salient point here, that if you are going to embark on a net zero policy, then it is going to cost energy consumers more money than if you actually just go for what's readily and easily available. And the government is deciding to go down the route of net zero, and it's got laudable aims, no doubt, that it wants to save the polar bears, but ultimately what our carbon emissions amount to less than 1% of total global carbon emissions. We're not going to save the polar bears however hard we try, and all the while we're going to put high intensive energy usage, whether they be for residential, for homes, tens of thousands of homes, or businesses that, of course, rely on high energy usage. We're going to put that all in the hands of a few wind farms and solar farms. And I think the risk is that actually, the government's got here is that if it wants to go for economic growth, if it wants to attract these data centres to the UK from major, AI companies or tech companies to build them, they use huge amounts of energy, also huge amounts of water. We need to build reservoirs, I didn't know this, but for cooling them all down. And it's all very well sort of repeating the platitudes, but the platitudes don't change the facts that ultimately, if we want to go for economic growth, we need to be less fussy about the types of renewable energy that we use. We need to get on with it. And I think, the government's obviously has decided to go the way it's going with this, but I do wonder actually as we move through the Parliament that actually Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, the penny just starts to drop.
Well, I always imagine Ed Miliband taking this whole Great British Energy thing and all of the various facts just into Dragon's Den and seeing Peter Jones absolutely decimate this plan for lots of reasons. I mean, I just don't believe he'd get it across the line in any shape or form.
And it will cost jobs as well. We've got this situation where, okay, in 20 or 30 years' time, you could see all of these wind farms being, sprouting up across the country, built in factories up and down the country. Yeah, sure, fine. But what about what happens in the interim? What happens to those guys who are working up in the northeast who want, who've got work on oil rigs, and we're not prepared to drill for oil in the North Sea anymore. We're not prepared to offer new licences. And I think the government has actually started to switch around when it comes to Rosebank and Jackdaw and trying to actually push those particular projects forward, because they recognise when it comes down to it with politics, it comes down to brass tacks, it comes down to money in people's pockets, it comes down to things like jobs. And if you're politician and you start fiddling around with the fundamentals, you're going to get into lots of trouble very quickly in key parts of the country that Keir Starmer is going to have to go back to in 4 years' time and persuade to vote Labour again. And if he can't persuade constituencies in the north, particularly in the northeast of England, where many of these people work in traditional fossil fuel industries, then he's going to be in real trouble.
On that point, Theo, thank you. Good to see you. Theo Ashwood with us here on the programme. Over to you on any of what you've just been listening to. 0344 499 1000. We'll come back to the main question we put out right at the beginning. What is the root cause of knife crime? More calls and comments coming in on that. You want to drop us a voice note? 0344 499 1000. Just coming up on 2:20.
Such an emotional time to be a farmer right now, and everybody is pent up, but we don't completely understand the parliamentary government's timetable, and we all have to be measured. We all make mistakes. The government have made a mistake. How that happened, I don't know. They got their figures wrong. Instead of pointing the finger of blame, what we have to do is come together as a nation, because whilst we are small in number, we actually feed the British people.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Mike in Lincoln says, Ian, when I was in the military and indeed amongst the veterans communities, we have an expression for people who claim to have medals they haven't earned. We call them waltz, as in Walter Mitty's. We now have a government and indeed a parliament stacked with waltz. That's a great point. I think we should reuse that and in tribute to the great work Mike and his colleagues would have done. Always, whenever we mention the waltz that are in Parliament, I think we should, there'd be a tacit nod to you, Mike, and your colleagues. It's true, we have a sort of professional politician class who don't know very much. You look at the front bench, none of them have been in any kind of business at all. There's only the Timpsons fella who's in the House of Lords that has got any experience on running anything. But if you think of Rayner and Lammy and Reeves and what's his name, Keir Starmer, him, the Prime Minister, there's nothing collectively. Never really had any. I mean, okay, Starmer's got his law experience. I get that. Admirable stuff. If you were his mum, you'd be very proud of what he did. But generally speaking, in running something, it's not the only prerequisite to become an MP. But you might think one of them would have done it. Let's go to James over here in Staffordshire on that issue of knife crime. James, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Hello again, nice to talk to you, Ian. Knife crime is just so simple to fix as shoplifting, but they won't do it. What's happened is we've had the long march through by the left, through the universities and that. So fear of the police, respect for the police has completely passed them by now.
Yeah.
So I firmly now believe the only way is to have Singapore-style corporal punishment on a sliding scale. So it wouldn't be for your first attempt. For your second attempt of just carrying a knife, 3 lashes. Third time, 6 lashes. Fourth time, 12 lashes. And take my word for it, they have very few reoffenders in Singapore.
That's very true. Although, is the reason for that? Because I'm deeply fascinated by those kind of systems where, you know, people who visit Singapore, it's a glorious place, very clean. You could drop your wallet and go back 2 hours later and it would still be there, or somebody would have handed it in. Of course, they have some criminality, but generally speaking, that sort of petty crime, what was a street crime, the menace of the night times in inner cities, is a very different ballgame. Is it because of that, or is it because if you do go to jail, then you really are going to jail? I mean, it's going to be tough and it's going to be lengthy.
I think it's really a bit of both.
Yeah.
So, because we've stopped disciplining, parents can't discipline the children at home, per se. They stopped doing it in school. I don't know whether I'm old enough to know when we had the cane and slipper in school.
I just arrived in school as they'd banned it, so I never experienced it.
And sadly, it was the same 3 or 4 thick lads who got the cane each time.
Yeah.
But you had 600 in the school who never did.
Yeah.
Because they didn't run in the corridors, they didn't backchat teachers and this and the other.
Very true. It was there was a sense that a higher punishment existed, right?
Yes.
It was like, yes, you can get detention, you can be given lines, they can ring your mum and dad, but if you got the cane, you were in totally different territory. That doesn't exist. That sword of Damocles doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, so the fear has gone. The fear and respect of the police has gone.
100%.
Most of the time you find, I did 20 years in the police. Most of the time you actually find them filming.
Yeah.
You know, so as I said, all it needs to do, basically, it's always like the return the boats thing. All you need to do is a few times for the word to get around.
Yeah.
Because
there is a lack of respect, and I don't think we don't want people fearful of the police, but you want to know that there's a line you wouldn't cross. And I've told this story before, James. This will be no surprise to you. A guy I was talking to a little while ago. He was a cop, worked in the armed unit. He was on duty, him and a colleague, also armed, and they happened to be near a shopping centre, so they wouldn't ordinarily have gone to a job like that, but they just happened to be the nearest police, and in they went. They walked into this shopping centre. There was some kind of fracas with some kids, and you've got 2 guys who are about 6'4" each and nearly as wide, carrying guns. Obviously, they've got one that they're holding, and they've got one on their belt. You know the scene. And a group of kids straight away up to them, mobile phones in their faces, and calling them all sort, pigs and God knows what, all of the usual stuff. And he said, at what point did a 14-year-old not be a little bit fearful of a 6'4" bloke with 2 guns? I mean, that's kind of where we've got to.
No consequences of the action.
None at all, no. He said it was extraordinary. He said we weren't expecting a royal welcome, but simultaneously, isn't that a bit bizarre? God, if I was a kid and I saw that, I'd think, my God, the armed police have arrived outside Boots. I mean, that would be a big story, right?
Yeah, I mean, can I ask you a question? Did you ever get a sort of a smack on the bum from your dad?
Yeah.
Right. Would you reoffend doing the same thing for a second smack on the bum?
Very rarely, I don't, if at all, no.
Yeah, precisely. So
I didn't want that smack on the bum.
No, pain is an excellent teacher.
There it is.
It's the same for shoplifting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we could extend that, couldn't we? I mean, do we go Saudi and start chopping off limbs?
I don't think you need to go that far unless it's for the 3rd offence.
Yes, yeah, multiple bags of quavers, then you might lose your limbs. Listen, great call, James. Thank you very much indeed for that, James in Staffordshire. There is something in that. I know it's unconventional. I don't smack my own kids, but I was smacked, and it rarely. It was a kind of a rare thing. It wasn't some big thing hanging over us, but maybe it was. Maybe it was there in the background, and because you knew it was there, it had an effect on what you did, because you didn't want to get upset. You didn't want your parents to be ultimately upset with you. There is something about a lack of consequences. I think that certainly plays a part. Paul's in Newport on this question of knife crime. Paul, what have you got for us? Hello.
Hello, Ian. Good to speak to you again, my friend.
You too.
Just to think, we talk about the parents. I think that's true, that the parents play a huge, huge role.
Yeah.
But I'd encourage us to think back to grandparents. The reason I say that, my father was conscripted into the RAF at 18.
Sure.
by the time he met my mother, and I'm one of 4 boys, okay, he'd already had that sort of instilled into him by the military.
Yep.
Women and children first, protect the elderly, all this sort of stuff, and that was driven into me. To emphasise that, when I was a lad, every Thursday, all the boys in the village I lived carried a knife because we were going to the Cub Scouts. We all had a sheath knife on our little Cub Scout belt, probably a 3-inch blade in the sheath, wasn't it? And we'd
remember it, yeah.
Down there, then we'd go into the woods and we'd whittle this and we'd make a fire and all stuff. At no point in my life have I ever thought I'll pull that out and stab someone.
Do you know what? When I remember getting a couple of sheath knives for Christmas because that was how it was. And but at home and at Cubs or Scouts, no one ever, when talking about the safety briefings you always got were about not cutting yourself, right? No one ever talked about stabbing someone. It never even came up.
They always said, if you're going to hand it over, handle first.
Well,
They never said, don't go out there and stab some poor sucker in the eye.
I don't think it ever came, it would always be, don't leave it around because somebody might stand on it, or, if you're handing it over, hold the blade, hand them the handle. Don't cut towards you or whittle wood, as towards your abdominal system. No one ever said, don't get into a fight with the Green Six and start stabbing them. It never came up.
No, but it sort of if you bring it into today's world, okay. So again, I mean, I'm 62, so you go back, 50 years or something. There were lots of kids carried knives then because Cub Scouts was massive, wasn't it? Everyone was in the Cub Scouts, and you just did these things. You went, ending and take a tin of beans from your mum's cupboard and pretend, oh no, the dog must have had it or something. So kids carrying knives isn't new, shall we say?
Yep.
But what is new is the fact that for some reason they feel the need to stab someone, and that's where getting back to the fact that by the time my father had children, i.e. me and my 3 brothers, it was very, very much a case of, look, this is how we are in society. Women and children first. Stand up if Granny comes on the bus and you give her your seat. And so it was how my father was sort of indoctrinated by the army and the military and all this sort of what's good and what's right and what you do and what you don't fight for. And that's what he passed on to my 3 brothers, and myself and my 3 brothers. Bear in mind, touch wood, none of us, have ever been in jail. We've never been, in fact, the most we've ever done, like most people, probably had a speeding ticket because we were doing 35 in a 30 somewhere, some little van got us. Other than that, we just pay our taxes and
get on with life, really. Yes, which I guess represents most of us, but the contingent that it doesn't seems to be growing more dangerous by the day. Paul, thank you. Paul, a great call in Newport and a great reliving of carrying. The only thing that was interesting about that was so it was Cubs and Scouts, but Brownies and Guides. It's probably a bit of sort of knife-based sexism went on back then. Amy, who works with us, who I almost guarantee was a brownie. Were you yeah, of course she was. Did you have a knife, Amy? No. No knife. Adam, were you a Cub or a Scout? Adam was very proudly not. Finn was a Beaver, still is. But always good to get a little gauge of what's going on. And in fact, it is a case, a very real case, that it was just the boys that had the knives. No Brownies and Guides had them, but no one did anything bad with them. And it was a kind of great... I mean, this sheath knife I got for Christmas, I remember opening it thinking, wow, the Crocodile Dundee, no, that's a knife line. It was kind of in that ballpark. It's like, wow, this is amazing. I didn't know whether it was mistakenly wrapped up because they were going to carve the flipping turkey with it. It was a right piece of kit, this blade, and it had a lovely kind of sort of fake ivory, I suppose, handle on it. And it looked incredible. It had a little leather pouch that it went with, and you took that on the camping trips, and it was you carved wood. You might have chopped up some food with it. You stuck it in the ground like you were some kind of hunter afterwards. And lots of pet talks from the leaders about, be careful with this. Don't carve towards you because you might cut your bits off. Don't, throw it because it might land on your mate's toe. But no one ever said, try not to kill somebody in an act of temper or because they've got a better rucksack than you. He's got a Nike rucksack. I've only got an Adidas. It's all right. I mean, you might draw the line at a Puma, but you know what I'm saying. 0344 499 1000. That's where you'll find us. Lines are open. What is the root cause of knife crime? We're going to have a little chat as well about that inflation figure. Inflation's gone up. That in itself is a troubling headline for the government and for most people. But what does it mean in the grander scale? Is there a big knock-on effect of this? Maxwell Marlowe, the economist, is going to join us to explain more. Coming up here on Talk next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 25 to 3. Let's get a word then on this story. Inflation jumping to 3% in January. That's the highest for nearly a year, according to official figures. The rise has been driven by more expensive transport, food and non-alcoholic beverages. Flight prices and private school fees also contributed. More inflation rises are anticipated throughout the course of the year. Let's get more from the economist Maxwell Marlowe, who joins us now. Maxwell, good afternoon to you. I mean, firstly, from a political perspective, this was not the direction of travel that the Chancellor and the government were looking for.
Definitely not. No, good afternoon, Ian. No, what we can see from these figures is that the tax and spend model that we've been working with for 14 years now doesn't work. And it's going to be your listeners, everyday Brits, who are going to be paying the price for profligacy. And we can basically see from these figures that it is not just, the goods and services in our basket of goods where we get these figures from, but it's also having knock-on effects for the stock markets as well. The FTSE, AIM and small cap are down today. People are concerned, and the pound is suffering as well. So we're losing competitiveness internationally. And I think overall, financiers, people in the banking system are losing confidence in Britain, I think, just like your listeners.
Yeah. Is this exclusive to the UK? I know Germany are having a rough old time and have done for a while now. In France, there are some wobbles going on there as well. People often say, no Western country is left unscathed in this. Are we a particular case, though? Have we got specific problems?
I think we do have specific problems, Ian. And look, at the baseline of all of this, it's energy. And we've got this kind of net zero madness coming out of Downing Street at the moment, and the Tories were just as bad. They wanted to stop us from drilling and accessing the lifeblood of the economy, that being energy. And now we've turned to windmills and to solar panels, and we can see that problem in Germany and also in France too. However, we do have some specific problems. A lot of this change is driven by private school fees going up, and it's driven by giving large payouts to unions. So we have a particularly bad problem when it comes to those areas, and it's no surprise that these are leading inflationary figures in that basket of goods and services that I referenced earlier.
What about knock-on effect? Because, of course, the big enemy of growth, well, there are many enemies of growth, of course, but one of them is that lack of confidence. The C word is a horrendous turn of phrase to be out there, and when people sense that there are wobbly moments ahead and choppy waters, they reduce their spending. Companies make adjustments as well. Those that are thinking of buying a house might go, well, we'll just wait for a year or two. There's all of that goes on. I mean, this could be fairly tempestuous waters ahead of us.
Absolutely. I mean, let's look back to the 1970s when we had something called stagflation, and I think we're back in that territory now. And that, as you were saying, Ian, people lose confidence and they stop investing. And that's been a really big problem for Rachel Reeves. So she received these figures yesterday before they were announced this morning. She immediately called in the big investment banks and the big companies to really try and come up with solutions to get Britain going again. One of the main ways we can turn this around is by getting that really large amount of investment to basically add capacity to the economy. However, we saw this morning from Rachel Reeves' Twitter accounts that the way she wants to deal with this is to protect, Britain's pay packets. That sounds good, but it's going to be, hiking minimum wage. It's going to be, pushing those costs up on employers. And who pays for all these tax rises? Well, it's you and me, and it's your listeners. Yeah. The consumer always pays every penny of tax. It comes from nowhere else. So those are the big knock-on effects. We'll see prices keep going up. And, we will probably see about 5% inflation this year if things keep going the way they're going. And look, the next budget will be probably more tax hikes because we've run out of money to pay for public services. Yeah, we have to give Mauritius its money. She's
obviously backed herself into this rather curious, frankly unbelievable cul-de-sac where she has very little wiggle room without having to do a huge reverse ferret and fess up and say, I'm sorry, but what I said about no tax rates got to change, because I don't know where else you could possibly. I mean, you can curtail spending to a degree, but that's not going to be popular at the other end. So what does she do other than admit that their entire original financial roadmap was skew-if?
The fiscal credibility problem is a problem for every chancellor, of course, and I think she's in a particularly bad spot here. What she needs to do, she needs to reverse a lot of the taxes that she put forward in the last budget. That's VAT on private schools. That needs to go. We know that's going to be very expensive for the public sector. Because obviously all those kids are going to move into the state sector. She needs to reverse the hikes on business rates. We know that's causing a lot of pain on high streets up and down the country. And what she really needs to do is she needs to not do this employment rights bill. That's going to be really, really damaging for workers and also for customers. It's going to massively increase costs. It's going to make labour market movement much more difficult. And it's basically going to skew the economy into an even worse place. So, those big investors are going to want to say, hey, we don't want to use that money. We're going to take it elsewhere, probably invest it in the US. And that's where all the growth is happening, Ian. It's in the United States and Donald Trump.
And just a final point. A week or so ago, we saw that announcement of a small drop in interest rates. Very welcome for mortgage payers. But, of course, there is a tricky correlation between inflation and interest rates. And, are we likely to see those rates go back up again?
I think what we'll see the interest rates hold. I don't think we're going to cut them, because the plan originally was to cut them gradually and carefully over time, at a very fair rate, and to give lots of warning ahead of time, really. But at this point, we don't know what's going to happen, but we don't think it's going to cut further. That's because, to quote the great economist Milton Friedman, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary problem, and interest rates are a monetary solution. So if you raise those interest rates, you can bring inflation down, but it makes growth much harder. Yeah. And we've been too slow to cut those for too long. So let's expect a gentle plateau on those interest rates.
Do you know, it's almost as if we got the wrong people running the economy, isn't it? Goodness me, what a perish the thought. Maxwell, thank you as ever for your time. Maxwell Marlowe, the economist, with us on the programme. Thank you to him. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. Dave in Bristol, a word on the couple who are trying to be reunited with their kids claiming asylum. He says either they should be reunited with their children in France and sent back whence they came, or if they do get here, they should be prosecuted for child abuse in the first place, for risking their children's lives by undertaking such a risky journey. But no, this is another floodgate about to be opened by greedy lefty immigration and human rights lawyers. And Dave, thank you for that. What's interesting, the claim is the parents were on the boat with the kids, but the mum was taken off for whatever reason, and the dad tried to chase after the mum, and then the boat went off. I'm not sure I'm buying that story. That doesn't seem to me to be... Really? I mean, that would be, 1,000,000 to 1. And then the boat just left with the kids in it, shouting, Mummy, Daddy. I mean, tragic if that is the case. Who knows? But this is just the latest in a long line of just bamboozling, curious, unfathomable decisions or requests in this whole area of immigration. And it's getting a whole lot worse by the day, it seems. Let's go to Andrew in Hertfordshire on knife crime. Andrew, what have you got for us? Hello.
Good afternoon. I'd like to say you do a cracking job, and your assistant or your the man in charge, Finn, a cracking lad. Really well done. You put together a great team there. Well done.
Yeah. Can we just clarify something in case anyone wants to write to Ofcom? Finn is not in charge, and in fact, if we elevate him publicly, he then is legally obliged to be given a pay rise. So.
So look, the knife crime thing. Enough's enough. You look across the pond at Trump, and he's actually gone to common sense. And you and I, Ian, I'd love to go to lunch with you and Finn and sit down and do it over a glass of claret. But the reality of it is this. First and foremost, number one, anyone presenting themselves at a hospital with a knife injury is reported to the police, the same as a shotgun injury. That's why criminals went to knives.
Yeah.
If you go to a hospital with a stab wound, it's not reported to police. Number two, every single mayor is dragged into the Home Office tomorrow morning, and every single police force has to do 1,000 stops and searches of people every week, every 3 days, until the Home Secretary says stop.
Yeah. I have no idea why that is even controversial. That should be standard stuff, shouldn't it?
Well, because, if you're going to stop people that do presentations on talk radio, you'd stop people that look like Mike Graham, Julia, and yourself. It goes straight to race straight away. But people out there, they hate the police more than they love their children. Yeah. So if your child is stopped by the police and searched, you should go on social media and say, thank you, police officer Ian and Finn, for stopping my son and searching him. Thank you, because that's protected him. And how brave were you to do that? And then, it's tough, but if you kill someone with a knife, it's a capital offence. Yeah. I know it's tough for a lot of people, I get it. We'd have to probably kill 20 to 30, and then people would get the message. Because it doesn't matter how many laws you pass, it's all retrospective, and that's where Labour are good. They like process, and we've done something. No.
Yeah.
This is the way it is. You're 12, you kill someone, you're dead. And that's the end of it. And the other thing is, drag mothers and fathers onto social media. So your son was out and stabbed someone. Where were you? It's 9 o'clock at night.
Why are we not doing more of that? I mean, I noticed in the States a couple of those school shooting stories where the parents have found themselves being prosecuted, and I think in a couple of cases being given long prison sentences as a result of it. You're the parents. Where the hell were you? Gave your kid the gun? Really? And now you're wondering why your mad child shot up his classmates? Listen, I've got to move, Andrew. Thank you very much. That's Andrew in Hertfordshire. Let me just make a quick note on that caller. Disproportionately in love with Finn. Stick that on the files. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Time to find out, by the way, lots more to come. Loads of great calls coming from you as well. Lines are open. Drop us a voice note as well. 0344 499 1000 or a message 87222. The Voice of Doom Day 2 is on its way in about 2 minutes' time. But first, here's how you can find out how you could be in with a chance of winning £25,000.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
which is supposed to be a democracy, and that means Parliament comes first, doesn't it? I mean, that's the point that both leaders of the main parties were making, which was that actually, if the law is interpreted in a way which is counter to what was intended, and in this case, clearly, Gazans using a Ukrainian scheme is, then politicians that we elect have the right to say so. That's all that was about. And I think, you know, most people would side with the politicians against the judges on that one.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
One from Keith here who says, on the subject of inflation, small item, but Tesco just increased the price of PG Tips loose tea from £2 to £3.10. Wow. That's over 50%. I don't think I've bought loose tea forever. But it is quite, there's a distinct difference, isn't there, in quality in a pot. You make a pot of tea, you lob a couple of tea bags in there, you put the loose stuff in, then you clearing a teapot out that's just had loose tea in it is a fool's errand. That's not over quickly. One here from David who says, this one in from Phil Boy in Kent. I think the reason we have a rise in knife crime is general behaviour standards is because previously in our society there were standards you would be held to. For instance, if my parents took myself and my brother into a pub on a day out in the 1970s, they would first go in and ask the proprietor if they could bring us in, and if the proprietor allowed... And if allowed, the proprietor would inform my parents, yes, but make sure they behave themselves or will be asked to leave. This kind of social setup gave parents a standard to meet, and so they met it all. These layers of standards have been taken away. Both parents have to work, schools have no structure of proper discipline, no local police officer in the villages, no structure of the church. Without these external structures, parents have lost their way. I think that's true. I think there's something in all of that. Again, it's part of the bigger picture, but certainly when you look at... Have you ever read that book called Freakonomics, which sort of examines curious reasons why things happen? That's probably not the way they describe it on the back of the best book to buy to discover why things happen. But they'll look at, why crime dropped in a certain area, and the reasons for it are not always the reasons you would think. It's not just because they started putting people in jail. They will discover something like Phil has just described there, that if you take away all of those structures over a period of time, there's going to be a price to pay. I'm going to talk to Ricky in just 1 second. Don't go away, Ricky. Before that, it's the voice of doom. This is day 2. Didn't get a winner on this one yesterday. Remember, there is no prize, so don't phone in, but you can message in if you think you can tell us who is this.
And see something different.
I didn't think it was as tough as it apparently did. Nobody got it yesterday. Let's have a crack and see if somebody can get it today. Here it is again.
And see something different.
So remember, don't call in. It'll block the phone lines and there ain't a prize anyway. But if you want to just join in and have a crack at this, 87222. If we get a right answer, then we will reveal all after the news at 3. If we don't, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here's the voice again.
And see something different.
Who is that? 87222. Back to your calls. Ricky, down in London. What have you got, Ricky? Afternoon to you.
Right, talking of... this wasn't what I was ringing about. Talking of tea bags, I'll tell you a quick little story. Remember when the Houthis were attacking the cargo ships?
Yes.
Because of the Israeli war and all that, and there was like a rumour that people going, oh, you better get tea bags because they're going to... you won't be able to get tea from China or whatever.
Because they were chucked in those big old crates in the Red Sea or something, yeah.
Rat on tea bags, and I thought, oh my God, I can't do without tea. I can't live without my tea in the morning, right? So I went out and spent 200 quid. I bought all the tea bags in Sainsbury's.
That's a lot of tea bags, right?
And then nothing happened. And then nothing comes of it. So the tea bags now, right? They're going out a date in March and in June. But they'd be all right, wouldn't they?
How many have you got left?
I've got loads. I've got enough for about 5 years.
You've got 5 years. See, 5 years worth of tea bags. They do go out because I found some herbal tea in the cupboard at home the other day. And they're about 2 years out of date. No one had ever tried these licorice flavoured things that are meant to cure, I don't know, pneumonia or something. So I lobbed them out. I'd never really, because my other half drinks tea. I don't drink tea, so they are always there. But they've obviously got a sell-by date. I reckon you could go, and we can't advise this, I reckon you could go another 6 months after the sell-by date, but I don't reckon you could go 5 years.
I love me tea. I had to. I thought, oh, my God, I can't.
Yeah, you got a lot of manky tea there. I'm telling you, Ricky. I mean, I get what you were trying to do, but, you know, everyone get... That's what people were doing with hand sanitizer, wasn't it, during COVID?
Terrible people that buys everything when you're not supposed to. Oh, because everybody's buying all the toilet rolls and all that, innit?
So, yeah.
But you've got to get in there first. But anyway, right, so back to the original point.
God.
Knife crime.
Yeah.
I caught the ITV news last night. I haven't watched it in a long time, right? Because normally when I switch YouTube on, the telly normally comes onto mainstream. So the ITV News was on, talking about knife crime.
Yeah.
Talking about tagging. People that are caught with carrying knives and being tagged. And they were saying that a black person is twice as likely to wear a tag as a white person. I don't know whether you're aware of this statistic. Right? So then what they were doing, they were interviewing these people of colour, these black lads, have all been caught for carrying knives and had tags put on them. And they were telling that they were saying to them, "Oh, we feel so degraded and dirty that we've got to wear these tags and all this."
Right.
What amazed me, right? What amazed me, the reporter, not once did they say to him, "Here's something radical. Have you ever thought of not carrying a knife?"
What? Yeah, that would have been the answer. I was journalistically, I might throw that question in there, and then you won't be wearing the flipping tag, you half-wit.
I was watching in amazement, right?
Yeah.
On TV, and I just and it's changed. It's gone right downhill. No disrespect to people of colour, right? But the reporter. I'm not going to go down that road anyway. But that's basically.
Well, there is. I mean, there's a disproportionality in different demographics that get caught with knives and are victims of knife crime. I mean, I have to say this just to be brutally balanced on a sensitive issue. There are other areas of criminality where that isn't the case, but certainly on this one, with young kids in inner cities, there is a disproportionate amount of young black boys carrying them or using them, and being affected by being attacked with one. That's just a fact. So it doesn't surprise me there's more black kids. What surprises me that they're even using tags at all, because I've argued for years, Ricky, that to me it seems like the best idea. And bearing in mind we've got a prison problem, stick a tag on someone, put a curfew on, you can't go out after 4:30 in the afternoon. Not necessarily job done, but it's going to help, right?
Yeah, I've got a point to make. It's quite controversial, and exactly what you were saying. Let's talk about black kids, right? So they was interviewing these black young adults, right? So no disrespect, but they weren't educated, and it seems to me, I say this in a kind way, looking at them, it's highly unlikely, because if they've come from foreign lands, they're never going to amount to anything. They're never going to hold down a job. Like, the jobs that are likely to get are going to be so low paid, they're not going to do it. So, but basically, the only option is
to have it. Yeah, look, you might think you had a clunky way of saying that. I know exactly what you're saying, and those kids, and again, you know, when we're talking about kids committing crimes in this sort of area, they hardly go to school, some of these kids. So even whether they come from another country, you're talking about kids who have come from elsewhere, but kids who are, you know, domestic here, you know, with something get to 13, they're hardly at school, and there is no education, and therefore there is no job, and there's no full-time prospects because there is no job. So you're right, Ricky, you know, a life on the streets, it's kind of worth a punt, right? Because you think, well, you know, it's all right. I don't have to get up in the morning, and it's kind of all right, and mostly we don't get caught, and, you know, it's much easier to nick a pair of trainers than buy them. Much easier to, you know, whip out your knife and get yourself a free phone or whatever implementation somebody has for that. Absolutely spot on. Ricky, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's go to Ken in Manchester. We've not got long, Ken, but I'm sure you can do it. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are this. If somebody does something wrong, yeah, you know, prison isn't the answer, because, you know, prisons are overfull and they're not going to spend much time in there. Yeah. I think that if you get caught with a knife and you've no reason to have that knife, you should be publicly birched. Now, I know that in Isle of Man, nobody's ever been birched twice. Now,
yeah, I don't think they birch in the Isle of Man still, but I hear you.
No, historically they've done it.
Yeah,
but what I'm saying, you've got to deprive somebody of something. Now, these people, it's no good saying we wouldn't take money off you, because 9 times out of 10, they've got no money. So the best thing to do, even if a dog poops on the floor, and the old days used to give the dog a crack, it never did it again. Now, all these do-gooders, yeah. But all these do-gooders...
I don't want to... No, I hear what you're saying, and there is a very seductive argument about bringing back the birch or the whip or the cane or the whatever else they call it. I get it, Ken. Thank you. I totally understand why, there is a temptation to go down that route. Are we better than that? Are there other options? Again, stand by for more implementation of the electronic tag in the coming years. Loads to come in the next section. We'll talk about the curious, mysterious missing parcels that lose every day, unfortunately named company in this context. We'll also hopefully get a winner to the Voice of Doom. Here's the voice.
And see something different.
Who's that? If you think you know, 87222. Hopefully we get a winner, and I can reveal all on the other side of the news at 3 o'clock, which is coming up on Talk next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Coming up on 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is the home of common sense. Lots to get through. We're talking about that police review, talking about how it's easier for kids to buy knives than paracetamol or scratch cards, prompting stricter knife sale regulations and tougher prison sentences for under 18 sales. Now, we can have this conversation again and again and again. I've done this for 20 odd years, the same conversation. Let's get to the basics here. What is the root cause of knife crime? Because kids aren't stabbing each other because of loopholes in how easy it is to buy a knife. That comes later. That might not be helpful to the picture, and let's tighten it all up. But it ain't the answer we're looking for here, Yvette Cooper. More on that. Also, Ukraine's President Zelensky has accused Donald Trump of being trapped in a disinformation bubble. He's essentially firing back after Trump claimed Ukraine started the war with Russia and could have ended it easily. Got a bit angry, did Mr. Trump. More on that as well. And delivery company Every has admitted that it will lose 8 million packages this year. That's 22,000 a day. You can't make this stuff up. 0344 499 1000. Have we got a winner on the voice of doom? Let's have another listen to the voice you're trying to guess.
And see something different.
Who is that? Reese Witherspoon? No. Theresa Gorman? That goes back a few years. No. Andrea Leadsom? Ivanka Trump? Jennifer Ewing? No. Caroline Leavitt, who's the youngest White House press secretary in history? No. Kelly Jane Keane? It is not. Marjorie Taylor Greene? It is not. Britney Spears? It is not. In fact, we still don't have a winner, which means this voice...
And see something different.
Will roll over to tomorrow, same time, about 2:45. Now, Every has been branded Britain's worst courier, admitting it will lose 8 million packages this year. You know, when I first saw this story, I thought there was surely some mistake in this. 8 million. If you lose 8 million packages... surely you wouldn't get a contract with anyone, would you? I mean, if you were one of the companies for which they deliver, we've all had the Every person pitch up with a parcel. Wouldn't those companies go, well, we can't use those guys. They're losing 8 million. That's 22,000 packages a day. I mean, it's extraordinary. It is, however, just 1% of the 800 million parcels set to be delivered throughout the course of the year. The company says some may eventually be delivered, but many will be lost, be stolen or damaged. I mean, if that is your track record, you've got one job as the delivery company, you would surely, you know, wouldn't the shops, Gap or whatever, wouldn't they go, well, I'm not going to give you the Every option on the website because they might lose the darn thing. They're losing 8 million a year, for God's sake. Let's speak with Harry Wallop, retail and consumer expert. Afternoon to you, Harry. I mean, it's not a great look for the CV, is it? You couldn't put that on your advertising hoardings. Every, the company that loses 8 million parcels every single year.
Well, no, indeed. But as you point out, what this figure does, it combines parcels that are lost and parcels that are late, and it puts them all in one big block. Yep. If we were to look at something like Royal Mail's figures, Royal Mail far bigger. They deliver 1.5 billion parcels a year. They don't split out the lost parcels. We don't know how many parcels Royal Mail is losing, but we do know that in terms of things like first-class delivery of letters, only 93% actually arrive within 2 days. Yeah. I mean, there was a time when you could send a first-class letter and it'd be guaranteed to get there the next day, even if you sent it in the evening. So it's possible that, for instance, Royal Mail is losing far more parcels than Every, and Every might just be, you know, in the middle of the pack, or this is just confirmation that Every is, you know, the worst delivery company out there, and there's a reason why it frequently comes bottom of all, you know, if there's ever a survey, something like the Citizens Advice or which consumer company, invariably Every comes down at the bottom.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because this whole industry, this proliferation of delivery drivers, of course, it's, you know, within the last 10 years, I suppose, and Amazon would have been at the forefront of all of that. And now, I mean, you can hardly move down your own road for delivery drivers. I mean, you've got the supermarket people delivering groceries, but the Every guy and the all of the others that show up, whose names escape me. I had one delivered yesterday. Can't remember who it was now, but it was, one of those. I mean, they're everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously it's all to do with how much shopping we do online. Food shopping is still hardly done online at all. It's still it's pretty a minority sport outside of the big cities. But in terms of other stuff, we buy a lot of our stuff online. So it's now a third of everything we buy is bought online. And that's an awful lot of vans. You know, one of the reasons, you know, why is traffic so terrible in the UK? Well, there's a lot of vans out there doing the delivery. Yeah. So we may no longer be going to the shops as much as we were, but we're buying online. And of course, it's such a such a daily issue. It's such a friction. If you stay in expecting a parcel and it doesn't turn up on time, or it gets delivered to the wrong place, you know, they get the address wrong, or they throw it over the fence. It's one of those things that really gets consumers goats, because it's such a daily problem.
Yeah, the throwing over the fence thing. I mean, we had a parcel. If it had an item of clothing in it, it didn't really matter, but it went over the back gate, and just looking at where it landed, I mean, that was a heck of a throw from this fella. I hope he doesn't do that when he's delivering glasses. I mean, it turned out it was okay, but, you know, he wasn't to know that. There's people who steal parcels, of course, you know, from doorsteps, because that's a whole other criminal industry, just people driving around going, look, it's an empty house, clearly, or no one's in, and there's a big nest of parcels there. Easy pickings.
Porch piracy is the term.
Yeah.
I have a real issue. I have particularly, actually, I mean, Amazon, who come out quite well reputationally in all these surveys. Most people think Amazon are great, and they are very quick. But they have a real tendency, their delivery drivers, to ring your doorbell. And I know I've got one of those smart doorbells, so I can see the video.
Yeah.
And I often answer. And by the time I've got to the door,
they're
already in their van driving off.
100%. I don't know whether they're humans or robots. They are so fast back in the van, Harry. I mean, it's extraordinary.
Well, they're being paid per parcel, so they're under huge pressure to be quick rather than to get it into people's hands.
Yeah.
They take a photo, they can prove they left it on the doorstep, but in plain view to anyone going down the road who might think, oh, I'll chance my arm. It could be a really boring book or something far more exciting. Maybe it's a bottle of alcohol in that box. And, you know, that's a pretty easy win if you are an opportunistic thief.
Yeah, spot on. Listen, Harry, thank you. Harry Wallop, retail and consumer expert with us on the programme. I've got so many questions on this. We caught our neighbour a few years ago, had a parcel stolen, and she knocked on the door and said, oh, did it get delivered to you, as it sometimes happens, and, you know, we take stuff in for them and they do for us. And it hadn't. And we looked back on the doorbell camera and a fella had nicked it. But the fella that had nicked it was the man that from the local pharmacy who delivered, you know how some people get their medicine delivered, people who can't get out, or older people who are perhaps housebound and have got no other way of getting their medication, their prescriptions, etc. It was this fella. And, of course, because he looked a bit official, because he's got a van with the name of the pharmacy on the side, and was he wearing a high vis? I can't remember. He had a clipboard, and so he comes, knocks on the door, he waits, he's doing something, picks up the parcel and legs it. And apparently it had some, I think it was nutrition drinks in there. There were like 10 nutrition drinks. He didn't know that. He was hoping for, I'm sure, more valuable booty. But that fella was driving around still. I mean, they reported it and said to the farmers, you know, the bloke that delivers your medicine is also a bloody tea leaf. You know, he's nicking parcels and arguably follows the delivery man because he's out on the road anyway and thinks, I'll have some of that. And did. But seemed to keep his job, at least for a bit. If you've been in this position, in whatever capacity. I once found a packet of socks stuffed between my shed and the fence, where the guy had gone into the back garden, looked for somewhere, because you know the classic that you have something expensive delivered and then they put the package in the recycling bin and you don't know it's in the recycling bin, and then the recycling bin gets collected and your new phone gets taken away to the cruncher, never to be seen again. There's those kind of stories, but leaving things in your package has been left in a safe place. Right, where's the safe place? We found these socks, I think it was about 18 months later. There was just a little gap where the guy had thought, oh, no one will find them there. Yeah, damn right, mate, not even us, whose parcel it was. He clearly thought it was a good place to leave it. Broken stuff that's thrown over the fence. You can spend a whole evening, have a couple of tinnies while you're doing it, but you can spend a whole evening looking at YouTube videos of both people, delivery drivers throwing stuff over fences, which is always, especially when it's got written on the side of the box, 72-inch plasma television. You think, what? How would you not know? Or people, the porch pirates, people nicking stuff, which I find confusing, because if that was your thing, nicking stuff, the only thing you'd want to check is they haven't got a doorbell with a camera, right? You might think that would be the first on the list. Clearly not. People like to do a bit of that, might have another little look at that on the way home from work. But in sympathy, if you're the driver of huge. I mean, it looks to me, I know people go, do you know what? You're your own boss. What a nice little job. You can go out and deliver stuff. If you've got 100 parcels there and you've got all your addresses where you've got to go to and they're in some sort of order, but some have got to be signed for. I imagine that's where the trouble starts, yeah? Because you go out there, you deliver the first one and the second one. The first 12 you deliver. And you think, well, I've got 100 parcels and I've delivered 12 within half an hour. This is amazing. I'm going to have a shorter day than I thought. Then you get to parcel number 22 and they're not in and they need a signature and you've got to wait, or there's some other instruction, or there's a problem with the person at the door who does answer. And then you realise your half hour that you thought you'd saved, you've now lost, and you've lost another half an hour on top of that. And before you realise it, you're out at 10 o'clock at night still delivering, because you can't go back to the depot if you've still got your parcels on board or something. How does that work? Is parcel delivery, whether you're Amazon, Yodel was the other one I was trying to think of, Royal Mail, but take the new one, the Everys, the Yodels, the Amazons. Is that a good job? Is that, I hear this about people who do Deliveroo stuff. Depending on your reasons for doing it, I suppose, will decide on whether you think it's a good job. If it's a part-time, can you do that part-time and go, I can do you like 4 hours a day and no more? How does that work? And if you do it for a living, does it work all right? Because it always looks to me like I get the peace of mind of being on your own and having no one shouting down your earhole, but I can see the downside of having 100 or 200 parcels in the back of your truck that you have to get rid of that day. Probably a bigger job than it maybe looks. So we'll take some calls on that, 0344 499 1000. But your woes, tales, trials and tribulations of the delivery that went skew-if. I'm bound to ask that, whether it was the smashed item, the stolen item, or the item that was left in a safe place, which you simply could not find. It was worse than a flipping Rubik's Cube in the dark. 0344 499 1000. Steve in Cambridge says, 11 parcels in the last 8 weeks from Every. Only 4 turned up. The other 7 put down as handed direct to resident. At the door, no photos or anything. Good show as usual. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, that's the other one. Or when they just leave a leaflet saying, saying nothing. You just get a leaflet through the door that's got Every or Yodel or something, or Royal Mail, but doesn't tell you anything. Well, are they going to deliver it again? Did they leave it with a neighbour? We've all done the multiple neighbour knock, haven't we? Or try number 120. No, have you got it? I'm halfway down the road by now. Number 356. Did you get a putt? No, thank you. Let's go to Stuart in Staffordshire. Back to the discussion we were having at the beginning on knife crime. Stuart, what have you got for us? Hi.
Hello. I actually think that all this knife crime is driven by simple status. You've got dissolute groups of people wandering about different places, usually an urban environment, and what it is they've got no like permanent lifestyle. They've got no job, or they're not interested in school or home life or whatever. Sure. But what they have got is like an area that they want to patrol and police and be like the top people in it. And so they're going to take knives with them because they think that the people they're against are going to take knives and so on and so forth. So, it's to have the best clothes, the best girl.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, and that's all part of it, isn't it? Carrying your blade around. And you look at some of those, CCTV images, Stuart, moving images of people, kids walking through the streets holding the machete. I mean, not even hidden.
No, they're not. No,
because they're enjoying the status of it. Don't argue with me. Look what I've got.
Exactly, and I mean, they don't necessarily want to use them, but the trouble is, and I'm going to use a word, if they get into a rumble or an argument or something, then somebody's going to get hurt, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're not, necessarily going to say, right, I'm going to stab you to death, but they end up being used because they're there.
Of course. Stuart, thank you. It's a good call. This from Carl in Hertford, who says, regarding Every, following my experience with Every, I will never use them again. They lost my parcel worth £160, which they admitted. I paid full insurance, which cost £15, but they made it so difficult to get through to them. When I finally did, They were so unscrupulous in their handling of my case, and they squirmed their way out of reimbursing my loss. That is a total disgrace. Their insurance isn't worth a damn. Double insult to injury. You just know that whoever the phone operators are that work in that department of delivery companies are told, like making an insurance claim, right, in any other capacity, they are told to argue and argue and use every excuse in the book not to pay this person their money. If they're that persistent, you might have to, but use every excuse in the book. I'm sorry to hear that, Carl, but I can totally imagine that being the case. Trying to get your money back for a lost parcel, the one that says it was delivered and never, where did it go? You couldn't sit, did it ever get delivered at all? Did the delivery person half-inch it? Was it a moody delivery? I'm sure they're, these are mostly honest people. I've no dispute about that. We've got a couple of guys that come to our house. They're very regular. It's the same person. 0344 499 1000. That is where you'll find us. Back to your calls and comments coming next on Talk.
Which is supposed to be a democracy, and that means Parliament comes first, doesn't it? I mean, that's the point that both leaders of the main parties were making, which was that actually, if the law is interpreted in a way which is counter to what was intended, and in this case, clearly, Gazans using a Ukrainian scheme is, then politicians that we elect have the right to say so. That's all that was about. And I think, most people would side with the politicians against the judges on that one.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk, 21 minutes after 3 o'clock. Welcome back. It is the home of common sense. This is Craig in York. How are you doing, Craig?
Yeah, good, and you? So I did Amazon driving for a couple of months. So,
okay.
And basically, when you said you got 100 stops, you've more likely got 300, 350 parcels to deliver. And Amazon gives you 3 minutes per stop. You've got about an hour drive to get where you need to be.
Yep.
And then you've got an hour back to be at the depot. So you've got a 9-hour window. It's not that you'll be back at 10 o'clock or anything like that.
So you have to be back at that time?
Yeah, they only allow you to drive for 9 hours. So
so there's laws on that.
Good. In regards to leaving stuff on front porches, that's really down to the customer because they can choose where they want to parcel. And we get a lot of people that will say, put it on your back porch, and they'll say, I'll decide where I want it. So there was a lot of negativity, but I would think, and Amazon are really good, and they monitor their drivers as well on things.
Did you enjoy the job?
In actual fact, I did. I thought it was pretty good, and 3 minutes sounds like impossible, but once you learn your routes and that, the delivery app is really good. And I mean, it's horrendous when it's snowing, But
it's horrendous when it's snowing, and then of course you come across an address where the house is called Castle Meadow or something, and you think, where is this place? Because it's got no number.
Plenty of people don't put numbers on their door, and then they expect you to just know. And then obviously, when you're delivering at night time, it becomes difficult because some people have got very small letters on their door. So yeah,
that's very true. And no light outside. And then at Christmas, even if they have got a letter, they stick one of those wreaths over the letters, over the numbers rather, so you can't see it at all. Yeah, I get all of that. So you stopped doing it. Was that because it was a sort of an in-between job?
It was an in-between job, but to be fair, it's pretty much you're self-employed. There's pros and there's cons to it, but to be fair, it's and by the way, you don't get paid per parcel. You get a flat rate per day.
What happens if you end up going back to the depot then with 50 parcels you couldn't deliver?
Well, I delivered during the snow at one time, and I took out 240 parcels, took back 160 because you couldn't get to it because of the snow.
Yeah.
There's no issue. Amazon are quite, reasonable. They don't like to fail any routes, and they expect you to be able to do it. But I mean, if it's bad weather or whatever, it's bad weather. To be fair, Amazon does look.
They get that.
Safety is their concern.
Yeah, got it. Listen, great one, Craig. Thank you very much indeed for that. Craig in York, who's done it, been there, seen it, done 300 parcels. I don't know whether if that was the kind of in-between job, that would feel like a lot of graft. And he said Amazon were a good company to work for, which I can understand that. I know historically over the years some of their warehouse stories have been out there where unions have tried to get involved, saying, look, it's not that great. Everyone will have their own experience, but he enjoyed it. I just can't imagine having to stop and start a vehicle 300 times in a day. I know some will be near each other. Often you see the guy with a whole kind of handful of them because they're all in a similar area. And how the hell they get those orders and parcels out? We've all got the anecdote of, I only ordered it at 7 o'clock last night. It was on my doorstep at 9:30 the next morning. Nobody knows that. I think it's magic. I think there's some kind of alchemy in the parcel world that takes place. Jason in Sheffield. Back to that issue of knife crime. Jason, what have you got for us? Hi.
Only a short couple of points. First one is about knife crime. I mean, root cause of it is county lines and city gangs. I mean, we've known that for ages.
Yeah, true.
And drugs. That's that one. So that's that out of the way. But that's without a doubt 99% of the problem.
Yep.
Yeah. And on the Labour government, where these CVs popping up here and there, well. They say the CVs, but it's a work of fiction, shall I say.
They are literally the best fiction you'll ever read.
Yeah. What I think's happened here is with the government cabinet we've got now, none of them are vaguely qualified for the job they're in as being Secretary of State. They're not. None of them. Yeah. And the thing is, what I think happened was over the last 14 years is that one Christmas Eve they were sitting around the cabinet table, had a game of pass a parcel, and within each parcel was a cabinet post and a CV, a random one. And
so it didn't matter who got what post and what CV.
Got the job, and that's who got the CV.
And that's what you had to run with, yeah. I mean, it is. Look, I know everyone at different times of their life.
It's like that, isn't it?
It is, and everyone can kind of, either slightly inflate their credentials, and some of these cases, you might have done it 20 years ago, not thinking you're going to be in it, and I get all of that. But even so, if you're going to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and
these people are running the country.
Well, that's my point, and there's a case that's building against you. It's about integrity and honesty, and Jonathan Reynolds, a business secretary, saying he was a solicitor. I mean, how do you make that's not an inflation? That's a lie. That's a complete lie. That's not saying, I was a solicitor for 2 years when you were actually only one for 1 year and 11 months. That's fine. This is a lie.
Well, Jonathan Reynolds might have been soliciting something. Whether it was law, I don't know.
It was porky pies, I think, that's for sure. Jason, thank you very much indeed for that. One here from Heather. Beware of next-day delivery with Every. I paid extra for next-day delivery, extra for photo. Took 2 days, no photo. Complained, was told they didn't guarantee next day. Could take up to 3. I mean, don't advertise it if you can't guarantee it. I've had a couple of those over the years that are meant to be next day and never did show up. Alison in Burnley, never had any issues with Every. All my delivery people are very nice, unlike Royal Mail, who kept some cheese for 9 days before attempting to deliver it. I avoid Royal Mail at all costs. But you see, when you see the Royal Mail thing, it's a bit like, you know, having an iPhone rather than some crazed unknown name, isn't it? There's a sort of a brand thing. You know, I think British Telecom still do rather well out of the trust in the name of the brand, regardless of whether you've got experience of their competitors, etc. I think that just sort of goes with it. They're a walking, talking ad, and I guess Royal Mail rather similarly. And just like mobile phone contracts, Heather there says, no, in fact, Alison in Burnley says, never had any problem with Every. There'll be somebody who's had loads of problem with Every and none with Royal Mail. So that's just sort of how it works. This one from Mike down in London. I ordered an item from Vinted and selected the option to collect from the courier's pickup point. The courier was Every. According to the tracker, it was in their local depot near here for over a week. They then declared that they were unable to deliver it to their own pickup point and returned it to sender. You couldn't make it up. How bad they are. Thank you, Mike, for that. You see, there's a lot of that kind of stuff goes on. This one in from Kenny in Edinburgh. My main job is at the Ups depot in Edinburgh. And if we lost any parcels, jobs would be lost, and that's a fact. Every bosses need to kick butts over this, because customers can and will go elsewhere. No one will keep paying for a parcel to be delivered from a company that isn't delivering it. And maybe Every have just been really, brutally honest about what's gone on here and said, look, we're going to lose 8 million. It's not a complete loss. It's damaged or stolen 8 million over the course of a year. Maybe other delivery companies have a similar track record. I don't dispute that it's a minefield out there. If you consider how many of us buy stuff online, an area of life that didn't really exist 15, 20 years. Well, it did, but it wasn't anywhere near. These companies didn't. The Everys weren't there. The Yodels weren't there. What are they called? USB? Is it USB? Isn't it? USP? UPS. That's it. There's UPS, and then there's the other one, DPD. Is that right, Amy? DPD? DPD, UPS, Every, Yodel, all of that lot. They just weren't there. I mean, they might have been there in a very small capacity. I think the UPS guys have been in the States for years and maybe did a little bit of kind of more industrial work. But yet they're all out there now. I mean, it's thousands and thousands of parcels on a daily basis being delivered. It's amazing any of them get there. 0344 499 1000 is where you'll find us. Lots to get through. We'll talk Donald Trump and Zelensky. The big fallout has begun, no doubt about that. We'll get a qualified voice from the Ukrainian perspective coming next on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 0344 499 1000. This is from Mark, who says, every only pay the courier for delivered parcels, hence they get left on the doorstep. Any doorstep. Although it is infuriating when they don't leave it on the doorstep and you think, mate, just leave it on the doorstep. Had a couple of those where we can't deliver. And then the next day, they did leave it on the door. It's just, what's that all about? This one from Don in Chelmsford. A work colleague visited San Francisco, and while he was looking over a wall, his glasses fell into the sea. He told a cop that his glasses were lost at sea. The cop said, hell, if you know where they are, they're not lost. Perhaps every work on the same basis, says Don. You might be right on that one. So let's move to matters Ukrainian and, well, Mr. Trump. Ukraine's President Zelensky says Donald Trump is trapped in a disinformation bubble after the US excluded Kyiv from talks on ending the war with Russia. The leaders have clashed over the meeting in Saudi Arabia, which only involved, of course, US and Russian officials. Trump has hit back with this response. Have a listen.
And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue what he...
Well, it's always worth ending on that point, isn't it? He doesn't have a clue. We kind of knew that over the course of the time he was in office. Hard to remember him now as a president. Wow. Let's speak with Michael Graham, our friend in the United States, US political commentator, managing editor at Inside Sources. Michael, what seems to have divided... Good afternoon to you, by the way. What seems to have... What's divided the room here or caused some concern, even Republicans, is this... phrase he used of they shouldn't have started it. Is that a classic sort of misspeak, or did he mean something else, or does he really mean that?
Look, I don't know. You know, Trump just talks, words come out. You try to decipher one out of every seven. It's like code, you know, like which this word is a clue about the next word. So whatever. For the people who are frustrated, they see two things. One, Trump is completely wrong to put any of the burden on Ukraine. It's like when, remember, you're a kid and you were teasing your little sister and you take her hand and hit her with it. Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. You know, Ukraine was just there. Russia invaded. Ukraine did not. This is completely on Vladimir Putin. He's awful. And so saying, what were you doing there? Well, I'm minding my own business. You know, why did you start this? Start what? Start getting punched in the face? You know, so that's terrible. At the same time, where is the plan to end the war? And I think, you know, Trump it's always the one step forward, one step back thing. He's making a brilliant point. This is Europe. This is your doorstep. Who's going to have to deal with Russia? Who's going to have to deal with Putin? I mean, let's face it. At the end of the day, we got nukes. I mean, screw you people. We're on the other side of the Atlantic. This is your problem. What has Europe done the last 3 years? Nothing. They've sent some weapons, but that's it. No ultimatum, no beefing up their military. You saw the report, Germany's military is down to 50% effective rate while Russia is in Ukraine. I mean, it's not like you caught them off guard. Yeah. And so if Europe's gonna say, we want to be the powerless, defenseless, don't get us involved, this is someone else's problem, then you can't complain when the guy you made it his problem says, well, I'm going to fix it in a way that you don't want. I think those two things are both true. Trump's words, despicable, and yet Europe's behavior is incomprehensible. Yeah, it is extraordinary. It's only now, and this is where I think we should reasonably acknowledge Donald Trump, that, this thing is starting to move. So we've had this vortex of silence for 3-4 years. Nothing happened. And the bit that you're absolutely right, I mentioned this on air a couple of times, Michael. Of course, we can involve the United States. Clearly, we can involve Russia and Ukraine. But the wall of silence around European countries
bearing in mind, these guys over there in Brussels, they'll talk about anything forever, and usually it's stuff that matters, it's usually nobody cares about, and they'll have impressive powwows and press conferences, and Ursula von der Leyen and God knows who else, and all those many presidents and officials that are paid triple six-figure salaries, wheeled out onto podiums to opine and announce the latest initiative for ferrets with disease or something. We'll get all of this. Nothing on Ukraine. I mean, they should have been a daily update on Ukraine, like we got those COVID updates.
And I also want to put some blame on America, too. And most of it goes to the Biden administration because they were in power. But there's also a wing of the isolation Republican Party that's a problem with. Well,
yeah.
As soon as it was clear, that first couple of weeks, that Putin's plan had failed, that Ukraine was not going to collapse, that there weren't a bunch of Ukrainians dreaming of rejoining the Russian motherland. We should have given them everything. We should have given them tanks. We made them wait a year for tanks. We made them wait 2 years for jet. But no, we should have said, hey, Vlad, this is how it rolls. You get a military idea. If you don't, win it in the first 48 hours, you are going to get your head handed to you. And I'm not saying that there's a number of weapons that could have caused Ukraine to win outright, but they could have done even more damage. They could have raised the stakes even higher. They could have dealt a death blow to dreams of expansion. The Ukrainians have fought amazingly. They've taken, toy drones and, race cars and turned them into weapons.
Sure.
But the West did not do our part. And I believe that the Republican Party exists for two reasons: cut taxes and kill commies. And you can say, well, Russians aren't really commies anymore. But any day that Vladimir Putin and his vision is having a bad day is a good day for the West and our values.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. I think that speaks most people's language. In terms of where this Ukrainian story goes, I mean, what has irredeemably happened here, I sense? You've got Zelensky talking about Trump living in a fake news bubble or whatever the phrase was.
Bubble,
disinformation bubble. You've got Trump saying, where you been, man? You've been there for 3 years. There's clearly a fragile relationship right there.
Yes, there is. And the question is, so the people who decided we want to keep doing business with Russia over the past 10 years, even after they went into Crimea, even after their first incursions, we want to keep taking their energy. We want to shut down our nuke program in Germany so we can be even more reliant on the Russians. These geniuses are now going, that Trump's an idiot. What does he know? No, Trump is pointing at the problem. The problem, I mean, you can say Russia's a problem. Russia's a condition. Russia is a dangerous enemy. You can't wave a magic wand and go away. You're stuck with it. The problem and solution is, what are you going to do about Russia? And Europe's answer has been take their money and hope they don't cause problems. Well, guess what? They keep causing problems. You keep giving them your money, and then you get mad when you don't like the solution. The big picture solution would be for Europe to make it clear that they are not going to accept something beyond a certain point. And here is the military commitment we're going to make to enforce that. Yeah. And those two things will never happen because the Europeans cannot unite. They don't believe in Western values. That speech that J.D. Vance gave, Vice President Vance, was absolutely right. The principles of freedom, liberty, free speech, whatever, Europeans just don't believe in them anymore. And so they're like, well, someone's got to be in charge. Does it really matter in Ukraine if that's Vladimir Putin? As long as there's a good bureaucrat there, making sure you don't insult anybody because of their LGBT standing, we'll be fine.
And the Vance stuff was, I mean, it was phenomenal, frankly. I mean, notwithstanding it, there was a couple of mini facts he didn't quite get 100% correct, but that almost didn't matter. The spirit with what he was saying in terms of free speech, social media, the weird world of that we've arrived in, the migration issue, which is massively controversial, but has been treated by our EU paymasters as being nothing like controversy, and no weight or seriousness really attached to it. He absolutely nailed it in that speech. And in fact, you probably saw, Michael, that one of the officials over there in Munich, when he gave his speech the next day, he cried.
Yes, and you know what? He needs to cry because he got a spanking. Because he's right. And then so the prominent CBS news program 60 Minutes did a feature on how Germany polices speech and how they send police, guys with guns, to your house over tweets or crap, whatever. And Americans are just, are you guys nuts?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes. You guys, and I hate to include you because I know you Brexited, but you guys have the same free speech issues there. I mean, that's one reason why you had 15 years of rape gangs raping children that never would have happened if you had had the free speech standards of America, because people would have talked about it rather than being afraid of the consequences of talking about it.
That's
how Europe is dominated, and that's why Donald Trump is president today, because the people who hate him, and there are plenty of reasons to hate him, kept saying it over and over again. Immigration is not a problem. That doesn't exist. There's no problem with what we're teaching your kids in school about sex and trans and crazy stuff, and DEI is not a problem. And they kept saying it, and the American people knew it wasn't true. He showed up and said they're full of crap, and the Americans said, dude, you're crazy, and I don't even know if you can do the job, but you're right. They're full of crap. I'm sticking with you.
Yeah, and we've had lots of those people getting a visit from law enforcement because of something they put on Facebook. I mean, there's a classic clip where the officer actually says to the person in the house, well, you've caused somebody to be offended, or you've caused them anxiety or something like that. You're at my house? Really? The 6 of you? I had my garden shed broken into a couple of nights. Nobody showed up for that. But because I wrote it on Facebook.
I did conservative talk in Boston for 5 years. I couldn't walk on the street without having crazy lefty, you're bad, just all the time. Like a tidal wave. I was the token conservative on an Irish radio station once a week for years. The president of Ireland called me a banker, but with a W, I don't know the rules now, live on national radio. I would have cab drivers tell me to get out of their cab. You're that Yank that's on the, And you know what I said? Okay, fine, whatever. You don't like me. You insult me. Call me names. Big deal. Jeez Louise, are you kidding me? You put people in jail for what they said. If the people who insulted me went to jail, it would be me. My wife.
And this is the
Even
crazy
my wife
thing.
would be doing time.
We've, but I hadn't realised until recently, just, having said that, everything you've just said and the experiences over here, I didn't realise Germany, these guys have got a PhD in this kind of stuff. They really do send the boys round if you do something wrong. They can't help them. How did we get here? And how did we all start replicating? Is it a group thing? Do they get together at a secret powwow and a meeting and say, right, here's what we're going to do going forward? Is that what the WEF do at their meetings? They say, start arresting people who say bad things on social media.
It's not that direct. It's a lot more subtle, but it starts with what, I forget the sociologist who said it, called the commanding heights of culture, when the news media and academia and entertainment media are all pushing in the same direction. They have a lot of influence. And so you had these crazy ideas that started at college. Yeah. And it's a lot more prevalent in the US than in the UK. But about identity and gender and DEI and everyone's a racist and blah, 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 and redistributing wealth and decarcerating people from prison. It's just because you murdered someone doesn't mean you should be in prison. Those ideas spread from academia as the elite sent their kids to college, and then they went to the WEF and they went to the USAID, and they start pushing. Hollywood makes movies, and who's writing the scripts, who's producing them? People who went to these colleges. And so they've been pushing in the same direction of crazy with very little resistance. And then, as you've seen in the UK, when you stand up and resist, you're a racist or bigot or hater or xenophobe. It can't just be, I have a different opinion. How about these facts?
Yeah.
No, there's something wrong with you because we're the good people. I know because I took Good People 101 in college.
Correct.
You must be the bad person.
And what's most disturbing, Michael, is that, because I always used to think, well, if you got these guys one-to-one over a pint, they would go, of course I don't believe it. No, they actually believe this stuff.
Absolutely.
They really do. It's in the marrow. It's in the DNA. It's irredeemable.
Can I share with you one more thing?
Go.
The best moment of that CBS News package about how Germany is putting people in jail for speech was a line about how they have the internet, but with a, quote, dose of good German order, said in a German accent. I mean, a friend of mine said this to me. He says, how can you be a German with that accent and hear yourself say, yeah, and what we need is a dose of good German order, and not go, oh my God, I sound like a character at a Schindler's List.
That's not sinister, is it?
How do you do this?
Love it.
How? No!
Listen, the world is upside down, but I sense it's on the tilt, which has got to be a good thing. Michael, as ever, thank you. Michael Graham, he is US political comment. He's our man on Capitol Hill. Thank you to him. Always speaks common sense. Managing editor at Inside Sources. Check them out as well. Lots to get through. More calls and comments from you on the way. But first, just gone 4:45, and time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning £25,000.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Some breaking news this morning revealed that under the Terrorist Act, 242 people were arrested in the year to June of this year.
That's something you can indulge in as to all the people who aren't going to prison because, well, there's no prison spaces.
So this is a Talk exclusive we've been looking at.
I said, you take these cuffs off me and speak to me like a human being rather than a common criminal.
You're just left wondering, does these people who lead us actually hate Britain? Yeah. Do they not love our country and everything that we've stood for?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This in from Leslie, who says, Ian, this obsession with free speech is getting completely ridiculous. We have free speech. Everybody can say what they like, when they like. But with free speech comes responsibility. And unfortunately, not everybody is responsible. Some of the evil rubbish on mainstream and social media and public forums is extremely damaging to society. No wonder thousands of people suffer with depression, even taking their own lives. I do agree with some of that. I'm not suggesting that all free speech does it. Where are the caveats with free speech? Because it's a great question. It's a great sort of. There's a whole paper and have been written on this. But where are lines drawn? What is okay? It's the should you be allowed to shout fire in a theatre, which is always the argument that is put forward, and the answer, of course, is obviously no, you shouldn't. And if you do that, you're a half-wit. Should you be able to stir up hatred? No. Should you be able to libel somebody? No. all of those things are already illegal. Inciting riot or whatever, all of that stuff is already illegal. So I understand that. I think what we're also dealing with, however, are people who have quite clearly been nabbed or nicked and sometimes hauled in front of a court for something they have said on social media that might just be a matter of opinion. It might not be everybody's opinion. It might be something that just doesn't sit within what somebody has decreed is the new book, rules and regs, the T's and C's of acceptability in the new world. And I think that's the bit that's at challenge. I totally get that, of course, there's responsibility. And you're right, you can read stuff that is vile. I mean, I saw a response from a guest that we had on recently. Somebody was quite disagreeable. I had a row with them over something. I mean, what the person was called on social media was unbelievable. It's like, mate, I just disagree with him. You don't have to call him that word. Why would you do that? I think some people just can't get their head around social media being sort of part of the real world now, and maybe that's the reason behind it. Georgina is over here. Georgina on Trump. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me on the show, Ian.
It's a pleasure. What are you thinking?
I have got to get this off my chest before I implode, so please bear with me, OK?
Yep.
I feel that the EU wokerati is just going over the top regards Trump with the Russia-Ukraine peace treaty. They're trying to demonise this man without foundation to do so. The EU, as you said before, has had 3 years to sort this mess out, and they did nothing. It's only when Donald Trump took the baton and started making headway that they started jumping up and down and wanting to be involved with the initial peace talks. Trump doesn't want the EU wokerati within a farmer's mile downwind of these initial negotiations. Yeah. He's dealing with a massive and sensitive ego with Putin, and he has to tread carefully. Trump is a seasoned professional and has done more political mileage than the Space Shuttle Discovery. He has a very delicate and important job on his hands here, and he doesn't need the EU wokerati to pickle these initial peace talks.
But does he need... I mean, is it fair to say that he has made an error by almost by deliberately excluding Zelensky here?
No, well, he's not going to do that. Trump has every intention of including Zelensky in these negotiations, but only when he has something solid on the table to take back to the EU and Zelensky to negotiate with. I mean, you can just imagine it. I mean, I know I can. You know, that you've got the two most fabulous men in the world where politics are concerned. Not saying that Putin's fabulous, but they are powerful political leaders.
Yeah, big hitters on the political stage.
Both of them have the testicular fortitude of a bull elephant. You know, having them with the EU wokerati around would cause mass hysteria. My advice to the EU would be let Trump do his job. This isn't his first rodeo. He's doing a marvellous job so far for both the US people and world peace. Keir Starmer would do very well to take one or more pages out of the Trump policy book, and then maybe his government wouldn't be in such a dishevelled
The trouble
state.
is, if he tried that, he would sound ridiculous, and I think he wouldn't be able to pull it off with the same aplomb and the kind of casual seriousness that is required when you're talking in those kind of tones. Thank you to Georgina. Errol made the point, can you name me something that really does challenge free speech? Well, if you look at the amount of cases of people who've been cancelled from giving speeches, sacked from jobs because they wouldn't recognise that sometimes, it might just be possible that a man who decided to identify as a woman isn't really a woman. I mean, there's God knows how many cases of that. Here's a man who identifies as Peter Cardwell, though. It's Peter Cardwell.
I do, although
you say you are.
Well, I'm identifying as Jeremy Kyle because I'm filling in for him
That's
today
very
on
true.
Drive. So
you are
there
indeed.
we are. Yes, how are you, Ian? You well?
Say that again. Sorry, Adam was just talking in my ear,
That's okay.
literally as you spoke.
Are you well?
I'm well. Can I just read you this? Donald Trump has put on his Truth Social page, a dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something all admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do.
Very interesting, especially when you take into account that Putin was talking in the last 48 hours or so about what he said was the legitimacy of Zelensky. We know, of course, there wasn't an election in this country between 1935 and 1945 when we were at war for the majority of that, for 6 of those years, whereas Zelensky has martial law in Ukraine. Should there be an election there? Well, it'd be probably very difficult to hold one, but nonetheless, this is a very interesting fissure, very interesting aspect of this, especially when you have Boris Johnson. We'll be talking about that in my programme, and his comments in regard to this as well, and various others saying this is not true.
He went on to say, I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered and millions have unnecessarily died, and so it continues. I mean, that's it right there. There's no open door for
No, there's
nice
not. And how does Keir Starmer insert himself into the process as he's been trying to do, trying to be a bridge between the two? I just don't think that's going to happen at all. I think most NATO nations are very, very annoyed about this. We're talking about that. We're also talking about knife crime laws. Will they make a difference? We've got a victim's sister, I know you've been talking to her, saying that it's made a difference. And could Jeff Bezos actually be in prison over knife sales to children? I think that's a good headline. I think the likelihood of Jeff Bezos spending 1 minute...
But that isn't the reason we've got a knife crime problem. It's not. Kids aren't committing knife crime because of a loophole on the Amazon page.
Yeah, exactly. Or that you can buy knives.
Well, 70% of knife crime happens from a kitchen knife.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
I mean,
You're going to ban kitchen knives.
There's your answer.
Well, Idris Elba said we should blunt them, which was a very strange thing and completely impractical. We'll talk to Isabel Oakeshott as well about all